This time I'd like to call this meeting to order. Today is Tuesday, February 19th, 2013. It's 9 a.m. We're at the Palm Coast Community Center for the regularly scheduled meeting of the Palm Coast City Council. Would you please rise and join me in a Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Roll call, please.
Mayor Netz?
Here.
Vice Mayor McGuire?
Here.
Councilmember DiLorenzo?
Here.
Councilmember Ferguson?
Here.
Councilmember Lewis?
Here.
Mayor, all members are present.
Thank you very much. First item on the agenda is the approval of the February 5th City Council meeting and the February 12th City Council workshop. Are there any additions, corrections, or is there a motion to approve?
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries without objection. Agenda item number 2, a presentation. I wonder if Councilmember Ferguson and Councilmember McGuire would join me at the podium. Just to give you some idea what this is about, the city of Palm Coast, as is the case with most cities in Florida, are members of the Florida League of Cities. One of the very special activities that the league conducts are training sessions for newly elected council members. It's very, very important because in addition to some of the more obvious issues like the Sunshine Law and Public Records Law that council members have to abide by, there's training on finance and ethics and a whole host of things. And I'm very pleased to announce that I have a certificate of completion for the January course awarded to Councilmember David Ferguson. And Councilmember William McGuire. Gentlemen, congratulations, and thank you for your efforts. You know, you got to get a picture. He's putting his best foot forward. Agenda item number 3, a resolution accepting the comprehensive annual financial report for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2012. Mr. Landon.
Mayor, City Council, this is the annual audit report. Am I introducing you first, Chris, and you're going to introduce James? Is that what you'd like
Sure.
to do? Okay. Chris Quinn, our finance director, will introduce this item.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. Today we have with us James Halloran, who's the audit partner on our engagement for the audit of the fiscal year 2012 financial results, and he's going to go through the results of the audit today, and we have the CAFR available for your consideration and approval.
Good morning, Mayor and Council members. This is your annual financial report as of September 30th, 2012. And just to kind of inform the people here, I'm glad so many people came out to see an auditor because I don't usually get this much enthusiasm and passion to go over financial statements, which I love. But just to explain a comprehensive annual financial report, we'll refer to it as a CAFR. This is above and beyond what's required by state law. State law will require you just to have a financial statement. The additional items that are in your comprehensive annual financial report are introductory section, a transmittal letter included in there, as well as a statistical section in the back of the report, which is not required under Florida statutes. This is above and beyond. In addition to that, your finance staff, Chris Quinn and his staff, submits this to the Government Finance Officers Association. And it's a submittal program where it goes through review by 2 internal people within that organization, as well as 2 external people. Could be, I myself review CAFRs for fun, because that's what I'd like to do. But I don't view Chris's, other people do, and they can achieve what's called a certificate Certificate of Financial Reporting Excellence. And your city has received that for, I don't remember how many continuous years, 12, 13, a long time.
It's 11.
11 years at this point in time. So just want to kind of give the readers kind of a little informational about what the City of Palm Coast does. A couple of different reports you'll see from James Moore & Company. The financial statements are the city's. They're prepared by the city. They're management's responsibility. A couple items that are in there that are James Moore & Company's. James Moore & Company will give an opinion on the financial statements. In addition, there is a letter in there regarding government auditing standards. In addition to be auditing under U.S. auditing standards, you're also audited under government auditing standards. So there's a report in there as well from James Moore & Company. You're also subject to federal single audit, which that means is that the city receives funds and expended funds in excess of $500,000 for the year, and that makes the city subject to federal single audit. In addition, the Auditor General of the state of Florida requires another report for us to inform them of certain items that we're required to respond back for the Auditor General. So a couple places in there you would see reports with James Moore & Company on it. Pages 5 and 6 is our independent auditor's opinion on the financial statements, which states that the financial statements present fairly in all material aspects, the financial positions, your change in financial position, and cash flows for the year ended September 30th, 2012. The Internal Control and Compliance Report, this is what's required by government auditing standards. We had no material instances of noncompliance required to be reported, and as well, we had no material weaknesses in internal control that were required to be reported. The third one I mentioned there was the Auditor General report. The Auditor General report, we had two comments. These are these are recommendations and suggestions for improvement that don't rise to the level. Anything that would be more severe would be in the Government Auditing Standards report. These are suggestions and comments that we have that are required. Segregation of duties over journal entries. This is a repeat comment from the previous year. It relates to the downsizing of your finance staff, as well as this occurred in a lot of departments over the last couple of years for cost retainment. When the previous finance director left, Chris Quinn was promoted to finance director, but his skill set that was in the department at the time has never been replaced. That position has never been replaced either. So there's a risk there because there's only certain items that Chris will do, and no one has the ability in his department to review that work. So that's an improvement that could be looked at over time. The Auditor General requires us to look at now deficit net assets in funds and negative fund balances. Previously, this was a requirement under financial emergency guideline criteria. They removed the state removed it out of that statute and entered it into another statute, but still requires us to present it to the governing body that we're auditing. So this is an informative disclosure, things you can see straight from your financial statements. You have a couple funds that have fund balance deficits or net asset deficits. The first two are very minor. The golf course only has a $36 deficit, and the tennis center has a $5,627 deficit. The other three are in your governmental funds, and they're your Transportation Impact Fee Fund, your Old Kings Road Special Assessment, as well as your State Road 100. All those have deficit fund balances. The Federal Single Audit Report, this is what's required if you spend more than $500,000 of federal funds. We had no material instance in non-compliant, and we had no reportable conditions related to material weaknesses as well. I always get asked, what's the financial health of my city? Well, we do an analysis that was created originally by the Florida Auditor General's Office, and what it does is it compares the city to itself over a 5-year period, as well as comparing it to similar-sized cities based on population as well as taxable property value. Some of those cities are Daytona Beach, Deltona, Kissimmee, Melbourne, Lauderhill, Ocala, Port Orange, Sanford. So that's about half the ones that were on the list. And your financial condition assessment based on those criteria was inconclusive, is what the Auditor General would call it, but I call it average. It means you're not too far above anybody else, you're not too far below anyone else, you're basically average. I don't know if you're proud to be average or not, but it's not a bad thing. It's better than being below average. So you also have your own fund balance policy. The city has established that about 3-4 years ago to say what should be our levels that we keep in our different funds. We don't want them to raise up to having 80, 90, over 100% of current year expenditures, but yet we don't want them to be in a deficit position. And currently, all your funds are in compliance with that policy, except for two funds, the ones I mentioned before. They're enterprise funds. It would be the golf course and the tennis center. The fund balance policy for those funds would be 5% of expenditures. You're currently at a deficit, so you just need to move some funds over there, most likely through a general fund transfer to get them in compliance. Or you could look at reevaluating that policy. Highlights of your financial statements for the year. Your general fund is your main operating fund, so that's where the majority of your property taxes go through, your state revenue shares go through. And this year, the general fund net change increased by $1.5 million. That was mainly due to cost containment program that you guys had in place. It resulted in over $800,000 of savings compared to the previous year if you look at your expenditures. And what's interesting about that, when we look at the next bullet, your property taxes. Property taxes went down only by $100,000, but in the general fund went down by $1.8 million because $1.7 million of property taxes this year went over to the stormwater fund to help fund operations in your stormwater fund. So if you look purely in your general fund, you really were down a whole lot of money, $1.8 million, compared to previous years. Capital grants and contributions, this will fluctuate every year, especially with grants. This year, your primarily grants were up by $3.1 million, mostly in transportation-related grants, road grants, those type of things. You have minimal fund balances left in your impact fee funds, just to inform you guys again about that. Most of that has been depleted. Hopefully, as construction builds over the next couple years, we've seen a little bit of encouragement there lately. Those funds will be replenished. Your utility fund, that's your water and sewer fund, had unrestricted net assets increased by $1.1 million. This was due as well to cost reductions of $371,000 compared to the previous year. And also with the Coquina Coast Cooperative, that entity is no longer being in existence, and there were funds left in that entity that will be transferred over to you guys at the end, and that's $478,000. We booked that was booked as a receivable this year because you're going to get that money in the near future. You do have advances in between fund where one fund has loaned money to a different fund inside the city. And some of those significant ones are the general funds loaned $5.8 million to the State Road 100 fund, the street improvement funds $2.4 million to transportation impact fee, and the utility fund has loaned $5.2 million to Old Kings Road special assessment. The Old Kings Road special assessment, that's just about ready to go onto the tax rolls, so that will be rectified going forward. There'll be a payment plan from those landowners to pay back those monies to Old Kings Road special assessment fund, and then those will repay back the utility fund. During the year, you also reclassified some advances that were in your capital project fund, about $5.5 million for golf course, $1.8 million to the IT&C Information Technology Fund, and $3.9 million to Transportation Impact Fee Fund. One thing that I'm always interested about is debt. People always say, how much debt does a city have? And you're one of the unusual cities that I audit in that you have no general obligation debt. So when you look at your governmental activities, there's no general obligation debt out there for your general fund or for your citizens. If you did, you would see a property tax millage on your property tax bill saying this is a levy specifically for general obligation debt. So that's one thing that keeps you guys in such a good financial condition is that. And you had no new debt in your funds for this year. So where you're at today in your general fund, you have about $4.5 million in unassigned fund balance in the general fund. As a percentage of 2012 expenditures and transfers, you're about 19%, 18% when you include the transfers, and when you look going forward to your 2013 budget, it's about 17%. So you're right there in the middle of your fund balance policy, which is to keep between 10 and 20%. Which you guys established a couple years ago. So I congratulate you guys on being able to do that in these tough economic times. I will take any question. Try to make it brief. I know I met with each of you individually either a week or two ago, depending on when I met with you. So I will take any questions or comments you guys have. And also, if I didn't thank Chris already, I always forget but thank Chris and his staff for making the audit go smoothly and keeping us well entertained.
Council, any questions? Mr. DiLorenzo.
James, last year on the audit, you suggested that the city look into diversifying revenues, and you didn't make that comment again this year. Can you explain why, please?
It's not a written comment. It's usually just an observation that Palm Coast is a little different than most other cities we audit in that you don't have electric franchise fees or utility taxes. You can have a utility tax on water, electric, gas, any of those items. So it's a choice of a city. You guys have made the choice. They made a choice years ago to primarily have it property tax based. as being how you fund your general government operations. There is an argument that says, is diversification better? Is it better to diversify? And you guys looked a little bit at that this past year when you're looking at funding for your stormwater. Should you institute some type of utility tax or franchise fee? Not just saying one method, it's just a different method. You know, there's a diversification side. If you have more revenue streams coming in, you're not as subject to when the housing market dipped, say this 3-4 years ago, that was more severe than if you would have had diversification in your revenue stream of having those franchise fees or electric utility taxes. And there's also the other part to look at is when that goes into effect, people are going to look at, well, how is that going to affect me? How's it going to affect a residential customer? How's it going to affect those commercial customers? You know, because there's always winners and there's always losers.
Thank you.
So I'm sure the city's going to continue to explore that like they have every year on the finance side.
Mr. Lewis.
We talked about some of this at our meeting, but one question, looking at other cities comparable to Palm Coast, where do we fit?
In what regard? You're going to have to give me a little more.
Okay, in terms
It's pretty broad.
All right, that's very broad, I understand. In terms of our expenditures versus the others for similar type of activities, for instance, we're in the process of looking at improving our infrastructure. I don't know how many cities are at that level or have done that. And I was just wondering, if you look at the West Coast or Southeast Florida, what do we see?
Yeah, I haven't looked at that specifically, but what I can tell you about you guys is early on when the city was established, the priority was roads, was getting the roads back up to the level that citizens and elected officials would be happy with. So that's the first, probably, say, decade of Palm Coast. That's really where your effort was. That's really where your dollars needed to go from that half-cent infrastructure sales tax was out there. Now going forward with that effort is, it's got to be on stormwater. Infrastructure was built, by developers, 40 years ago, and those infrastructures are deteriorating, and they're failing in some instances. So this is kind of where the new focus of the city needs to be, is on that stormwater fund side. Not much different than other cities. You probably have a little bit more, I would say, on the stormwater side because of your canal systems that you have inside the city. If you compare that to, say if we go down south to cities, say Ormond Beach that we audit or Port Orange, the stormwater side's a little bit different because there's not the canal systems that you guys have in Palm Coast. So I don't know if you can compare those apples to apples.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Other questions? Mr. Ferguson.
I noticed in your presentation here and in our audit private discussion that there's a provision for intragovernmental financial transfers, like loans from
Correct.
one group to another. Mm-hmm. Now, most of the people here, I think, are concerned about the water utility rate potential increase, and they're probably wondering, why can't some of the surplus money in other governmental departments be used to subsidize the water utility? Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah. Well, some of your funds are restricted by either state statute or by bond ordinance in your utility fund, say. But you have, say, your impact fee funds that are collected for transportation, recreation, those type of things, can only be spent in those areas. You also receive restricted monies from the state. You receive gas tax monies, allocations from the state. Those can only be spent on transportation-related items. So you have some inherent restrictions on some of the funds that you receive. That you really don't have a choice on where you can spend those monies. Other than spending it out of the utility fund and generating it off of water sewer. And you got to remember, in an enterprise fund, what the purpose of an enterprise fund is, it should be a self-supporting fund. So there's a theory that says, okay, should we take money from general government revenues, basically general fund revenues, property taxes, or other type of fees, state revenue sharing, to supplement an enterprise funds. And there's arguments back and forth on that, on whether typically you see it the other way. Is what you usually see an enterprise fund who's able to generate enough cash flow that they can actually supplement the general government side. That's usually not as hard for people to take as going the opposite direction. So that's what happens. You got to look at what the restrictions of those revenue sources are in those other funds.
Thank you.
Other questions? Because we have to pass a resolution accepting this, and that will take action by City Council, we'll now open the meeting to the public. And if the public wish to be heard on agenda item number 3. Anyone wish to be heard on agenda item number 3? Seeing no one approach the podium, we'll close the public portion meeting. Back to council. Additional questions, comments, or a motion?
Move to approve, Your Honor.
Second.
There is a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries without objection. Agenda item number 4, resolution approving the adoption of revised rates for monthly water, wastewater, and miscellaneous rates, fees, and charges for the future. Mr. Landon.
Mayor, City Council, this is a proposal that we've been working on for actually months. A lot of what you're going to hear today, City Council has heard it, if not a couple times, maybe 3 or 4 times, but we thought it was very important, particularly with everyone's interest in this issue, to attempt to, once again, go through all the options we've looked at, try to answer a lot of the questions we've received. So it's going to be really a 4-stage presentation. We're going to start off with Chris Quinn, our Finance Director, to talk a little bit about our current status in utility and some of our financial information and questions we've received. Richard Adams, our Public Works Director, is then going to talk about the capital improvement program. And then we'll have a couple of our expert consultants from Mark Gavin, who is from First Southwest, who will talk about bonding and bond ratings. And then the last one will be our rate study consultant, PMRG. I think it's Jeff is here today that will go through the rate study information and details. So with that, Chris, if you'll start us off.
Thank you, Mr. Landon. I wanted to start out with just a short governmental 101. These are some of the slides we use at Citizens Academy that I thought might be useful for the public. The city basically uses 3 types of governmental funds. 3 types of fund classifications: governmental funds, proprietary funds, and fiduciary funds. Today we're talking primarily in the proprietary fund area, where we have 2 types: enterprise funds and internal service funds. We get a lot of questions about what is fund accounting, why does the city use fund accounting, and James Halloran, the auditor, briefly touched on this before. Part of the reason is because we've got to comply with a lot of legal and external requirements related to the funds that we do receive. Some examples of restricted funds, in addition to the gas tax that James had mentioned, was the infrastructure surtax, which could only be used for capital projects, utility revenues for the operating and expansion of the utility system. Again, he mentioned impact fees just for infrastructure capacity improvements. And of course, we get a lot of grants that are very, very specific as to how we can use that money. And that's why we set up a variety of different funds to track the receipt and use of those monies when we do get them. What is an enterprise fund? We hear this term a lot. It's a type of proprietary fund. It operates like a business, is a simple way to give the answer. It's primarily funded through charges for services. And again, that's a kind of an accounting terminology, meaning you pay a fee for whatever it is that you get. The services are primarily to external customers, meaning that to the citizens or people outside of other governmental units primarily. It has a separate accounting and financial reporting system. The enterprise funds each have their own separate set of books. They're kept separately like a separate business would be. Our enterprise funds that the city has, of course, is the utility fund, the stormwater fund, the solid waste, golf course tennis, building permits and inspection fund, and the information technology and communication fund. Again, each one of these are looked at as a separate business enterprise, accounted for separately, and has its own separate set of books. Again, I wanted to touch on fund restrictions. Each enterprise fund has its own separate rate structure. The rates are reviewed to ensure that adequate funding is available to meet the needs of that individual business unit's budgetary requirements. We don't mix them. In other words, we don't look at the stormwater rates and revenues and the stormwater expenses and then somehow mix them with the utility. They're totally separate entities. We also have reserve requirements, and James touched on that, in each fund to help meet our ongoing operating needs, future capital needs, and also working capital needs. Our utility fund, more specifically, we have a rather lengthy list of bond covenants that restrict the use of incoming revenues. They're legally binding, and they're there in place to protect the bondholders. Again, the utility fund is treated like a separate business for accounting purposes. We produce financial statements for these, for the utility department like we do for the government as a whole and each individual unit. That's part of what was just approved just a few minutes ago. The excess revenues and profits are restricted from use in other areas of the city. We currently reinvest any profits back into the utility itself. This is another graph of the total city revenues. This is for fiscal year 13, our projection of total revenues. A lot of folks are surprised to see how small a piece of pie the actual property taxes are when we talk about our revenues in the city, and what a large piece of pie the actual charges for services are. And again, those charges for services are stormwater fees, utility fees, parks and recs fees, any service that the city offers that a separate fee is paid for. This is the history of our ad valorem tax receipts. Again, another Citizens Academy slide that we show, where from a high in 2008 of just over 20 million of ad valorem tax collections, the last 3 years, including the current year, we're going to collect about 15 million in property taxes. We brought it down over the last several years, and we've kind of leveled off for the last 3 years where there have been no tax increases. This is what we get a lot of questions, what do our property taxes pay for? Well, this is what our property taxes pay for. About half of them go to the fire department. Another 17% go to additional police protection. About a little under 5 million goes to street and park maintenance. And then we have a very small sliver that go to capital projects. That $500,000 is helping to fund things like part of stormwater, park safety improvements, our little bit of street resurfacing we're doing this year. That's where that bit of property tax revenue is going to. And this is where we really, took a hard look in this area of, and we've been asked the question of, well, how can we divert other revenues to the utility department? This is, when you're talking about property taxes, these are the areas that we'd really have to take a hard look at cutting services to make a significant contribution to the utility department from the general fund. Even if we eliminated the capital projects component of the property taxes, you're looking at about $500,000 a year, which would have a very minor effect on any changes in utility rates. We did look at other capital projects that are funded by things such as, we use the gas tax, state revenue sharing. Some of those things include, we spend about $200,000 a year on our sign and median maintenance program. Our guardrail programs, all of our basically street improvements and areas where we have small amounts. Again, some of the park equipment renovations. We can consider those. The problem with moving those revenues over to the utility fund is that it's small. It would have a small impact on the utility fund, but they would have to be permanent. A one-time transfer of any kind of revenues will not keep the utility rates from being affected on a permanent basis. It would maybe give some temporary one-year relief, but we would have, whatever changes we would make, whatever programs we would cut, would have to be permanent cuts to the budget. We got a lot of questions about our annual financial audit report. Worked out very convenient that James was here a little bit earlier. Our comprehensive annual financial report is prepared annually. It's audited by an independent external audit firm that is hired by City Council. The audit is required by state statute. The comprehensive annual financial report is not. The audit provides insight into the city's finances. It helps us with financial transparency and promotes general accountability. Where is our audit report? Well, it's on our website. There's a picture here under the popular links on our website. There's a link for financial reports. All years of our audit reports since we're in existence, as well as budgets, are available on the website. All of our audit reports are also filed with the Florida Auditor General, and they are available on the state's website at the Florida Auditor General website. Wanted to take a quick look at some utility financial performance statistics for the last 3 years. And these have really had an effect on what we're here to discuss today. This is a graph of our operating expenses. From 2010 through 2012, the year just ended, we've seen a significant decrease in operating expenses over that period of almost $1 million. This is just in the utility department. These are the direct expenses to produce water and take sewer out of our homes. This is, in governmental terms, a change in net assets as close as we can get to what would be considered a private business net profit. In 2010 and 11, we had losses both of those years. 2012, we had a little bit of a profit, but that was really primarily related to the return of those funds that James had talked about earlier. It was just under $500,000 from the Coquina Coast project. That's a one-time revenue source. If it wasn't for that, we would have had another loss in fiscal year 12. Another way of looking at any business is its cash flow. In 2010, you can see we had a significant negative cash flow. That was primarily related to the funding of the debt service reserve due to the bond insurance rating debacle that happened in the bond industry. 2011, we had another negative $1 million. In 2012, we're just below, just negative $50,000 in terms of our cash flow. It's important to note that cash flow includes all incoming sources of revenue and all outgoing payments, including debt service payments, principal, capital investment, all of the things that require cash inflows and outflows, not just what appear in the profit and loss statement.
Chris?
Yes.
Will you please explain that debt reserve issue in a little bit more detail?
Sure. For our 2003 and 2007 bond issues within a utility, we went and purchased bond insurance, which is similar to mortgage insurance that an individual might purchase on their home. What the bond in the bond world, what bond insurance does is when you purchase it, it allows you to take on the credit rating of the bond insurer. So the city's underlying bond rating, the city's bond rating by itself is an A rating, which is a good rating. The bond insurers used to be AAA rated, or the highest possible rating. So when you bought the bond insurance, you automatically got the AAA rating, which allowed us to borrow at the lowest possible rates and get the best possible deal at that time for those two financings in 2003 and 2007. When the financial crunch hit and the financial markets had their issues and still do to a certain degree, many of the bond insurance companies were re-rated, and these are rated by companies like S&P, and found that their financial strength wasn't really all that great. So their ratings for those bond companies actually went below the city's rating. For instance, the company NBIA, which I think has changed to National Financial as the company name now, their bond ratings are in the BBB category, are actually less than the city's bond rating. When that happens, which is built into our bond contract, which is part of the bond covenants that we talk about all the time, the city was required to automatically set aside an amount equal to 1 year's principal and interest payments on our two bond issues, 2003 and 2007. And that's roughly $9.5 million. So that money had to be taken out of our reserves and set aside, not to be touched, and has to sit there in perpetuity at this point until we either refinance or restructure our current debt.
And it wasn't just reserves either, right? It was from the capital as well, right? Some of the money that could have been used or would have been used towards the zero liquid discharge project?
That's correct. There was a portion that was from reserves and a portion from existing capital funds.
Thank you.
These are the reserves we were just speaking about. This is our unrestricted reserves. In other words, this is the amount of money of our working capital or amounts that we could use as needed. We were just under $8 million in 2010 before the bond rating issues. 2011 dropped down to 2.4, a little over 2.4 million, which was below our fund balance policy. This past year, we were able to bring it up to 3.5 million. The bulk of that, again, is that return of that one-time revenue. Coquina Coast revenue really helped out in this particular case. Just a brief history of utility rate adjustments. When the utility was purchased back in 2003, the city council at that point made a guarantee to the citizenry that during the first 5 years of operation of the utility, there would be no rate adjustments. So between 2003 and November 2008, the rates remained the same. In November in 2008, we had a significant increase of 12.5%. At that point was to address the capital needs of our 5-year plan at that point and going forward. The primary part of that 5-year plan was the water treatment 3 plant and related infrastructure. From 2009 to 2012, as part of the 2008 resolution, there were annual CPI adjustments. In fact, in 2009, we had a decrease of 1.4% because the CPI went down. The average increase during that time period annually was 1.67%. And with our current capital financing program, what we were really trying to do was get a comprehensive package together when we started this process to do 3 things. One is we want to refinance the 2003 bonds. There's a significant cost savings there due to the low interest rate environment today. The cost savings is estimated between $400,000 to $500,000 a year just by being able to refinance those bonds. We needed to get the capital. In other words, we needed to borrow additional funds in order to do the ZLD project, which is somewhere in the $10+ million range due to EPA requirements. The third thing that we were trying to address during the capital plan was the wastewater treatment plant 2, which was anticipated to need to start somewhere in the latter part of the 5-year plan. And looking at those 3 primary factors was how we really started going down the route of looking at the rate study and how was it that we would be able to put ourselves in a position to do all of these things over the next 5 years. Does anyone have any questions?
Questions for Chris?
Chris, looking at that, would you equate that with a resident who's performing maintenance on his house and doing all the things to keep the value of his house up? For instance, let's say, for instance, he has to replace the sod on his property because of whatever reason it needs to be replaced. Then he finds that he has a leak in his roof, which he didn't anticipate, but it's leaking, and now he has to take care of that as a replacement. And then he has a mother-in-law who decides that she doesn't want to deal with the cold in Massachusetts anymore, so she wants to come and stay in the house with her son-in-law. Okay, these are things that are not anticipated, but the maintenance is, and something that the homeowner takes care of all the time. And but at times he must have replacement and must have repairs. But then all of a sudden, he has to put an addition on his house to take care of his stepmother who's coming down, his mother-in-law who's coming down. So now he has to go out and borrow money. Okay, similar to what the city has to do in terms of meeting their maintenance and replacement needs. He has to go. City goes to the bond market to get theirs. We go to a bank to get ours. And he discovers that the interest rate right now is very low in the bond market or in refinancing. So he has to make a decision as to whether or not he's going to get a loan from SunTrust or whomever to make these repairs and replacements, or should he wait until later on, kick it down the road a piece and wait till later on and make these repairs and replacements? So that's a decision that the homeowner has to make, same as the city has to make those decisions. And whether or not his mother-in-law comes out or not, he doesn't know. That's a 5 years. She might come down in 5 years, 3 years, or 2 years. But that's the crystal ball thing. He doesn't know. But he has to plan for it. Would you say that there's much similarity between what the homeowner does and the city?
Well, there is. The utility systems in particular are very, very capital intensive, meaning that it needs a constant, steady flow of capital investment to keep the system up and running, which is similar to your renewal and replacement around the house, and also for expansion. And in your example, if the husband is being forced by his wife to build the mother-in-law apartment, that would be similar to what's going on today with the ZLD project. It's regulations that are forcing us to really look hard at that. And then also thinking ahead to, what other expansions do you might have to do in the future, and that's where the wastewater treatment plant would come in.
Thank you.
Just piggybacking on that, the first item on your 3 list of concerns, and that's the refinancing of the 2003 bond, I'd be willing to bet that anybody in this room who took out a mortgage on their home 10 years ago or so has probably refinanced that mortgage. You could probably have gone from 6-7% down to 3%. So that's a very clear correlation between what we do in our homes and what we're doing in the city. The second one, I heard some question from the audience, or ZLD is zero liquid discharge. Richard, are you going to explain that later? Okay, so you'll get an explanation of what that means. It's a shame Mrs. DeStefano isn't here. She always hated acronyms and abbreviations. Okay.
Was that my job? Was I supposed to
I guess.
point that out?
Hunter. Mr. Quinn, I'm in need of elucidation. When money is collected for an enterprise fund, all right, whichever one of the ones that we have, can that money be taken out of that fund and used for anything else? And if so, how is it done?
If the answer is can it, the answer is yes. As James had mentioned, there are some governments that once they meet all their other requirements, and the bond documents lay out those requirements of setting money aside, if there's still funds available after all of that for your renewal, your replacement, and things like that, you can transfer the excess at that point for any legal use by the city.
And how is that done?
It's usually budgeted. It's usually done during the budgeting process, where you would budget an amount of money to be transferred to another fund for whatever the purpose of that fund is.
But in our presentations, it implied that money collected for an enterprise fund could only be used for that enterprise fund. You're saying that's not necessarily the case.
Well, the bond covenant, like I said, the bond covenants are very specific. If you have excess above and beyond the requirements of your bond covenants, at that point you can consider using it in other areas.
Thank you.
If I may piggyback on that, though, one of the reasons you hear that is because there are restricted funds that we cannot transfer, and,
That's right.
and the auditor and Chris has addressed that. There's certain, grants is one, even impact fees. By state law, they are required to be used for a specific purpose. So those you cannot transfer. But an enterprise fund that doesn't have those kind of legal restrictions, just the bond covenants would be separate. So each fund has separate criteria, and there's not one size fits all when it comes to our funds.
Yes, it is complex, and again, it would depend on the particular fund, the revenue types, and what those restrictions are. But the short answer is that there are enterprise funds that are out there that make money, so to speak, above and beyond all the restricted requirements.
And what are those enterprise funds?
They could be utility funds. They could be things like golf courses. It really depends on the community. Everyone's different when it comes to that. So those would be some examples.
Okay, thanks.
In my experience in local government, most governments try to have enterprise funds break even. You don't want to lose money, but you don't. The only way you can, quote, show a profit is to charge more for whatever the service or the product is than it costs to deliver it. That's not, generally speaking, that's not in the best interest of the residents. You're paying more for whatever the service happens to be, whether it be a round of golf or a gallon of water. The goal, I think, in Palm Coast has always been to try to break even. Charge just enough to meet your expenses, your operating expenses, your R&R expenses, and your capital expenses, but don't charge more.
And I think that's an important distinction, Mr. Mayor, is that most folks who are in business in general don't look at renewal, especially small businesses, don't look at renewal and replacements and future capital needs as part of the breaking even scenario. It's just looked at as, okay, I brought in this much revenue and this is what my current expenses were. They're the same, so I broke even. In our case, we have to take a much longer term perspective than that and think about next year's renewal and replacements and next year's capital projects and the next 5 years renewal and replacements and capital projects at all times. So it is important to keep in mind that it's not just the operating expenses that we're talking about.
Okay.
But if you generated excess revenue, for want of a better term, there is a decision to be made. Do you keep it in the fund? Do you invest it? Do you give it back to the consumers by lowering rates? What do you do with that money? And that was basically my question. If that has been the practice of the city to take leftover revenue out of an enterprise fund and use it for something else, then it could have been, or it could be considered to give it back to the people that paid their utility bills in a form of lower rates for the oncoming year.
That's always a possibility. Okay. You know, in the case where you've accumulated more funds than you really need, yeah, that's something that could be considered.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Chris?
Good morning. Richard Adams, Public Works Director. Talk a little bit about the capital plan. That's really where a lot of the extra, the increase will be applied. First of all, I want to show how the capital plan has changed over the years and has been reforecast on an annual basis depending on the forecasted population growth and the need. And in blue, you'll see what the 5-year plan was that particular calendar year, and in the green is the projected capital expense for that year. So during the population growth, we kept increasing the capital plan, foreseeing the need for additional infrastructure to serve that growth. And as growth diminished, we kept reducing the capital plan, both the 5-year plan and the individual year's capital expenditure. And then back for the 2013, you'll see it goes back in the positive direction, and that has to do with the Zero Liquid Discharge project. The components of the 5-year plan, I've got it summarized in 2 categories. For each area, we have it shown for the immediate 2 years, this calendar year, or this fiscal year, and next fiscal year, and then separated out the following 3 years. You'll see the dollars there, what we plan to expend each year or each area. So we'll start at water treatment plant number 1. We have wells and well fields, $500,000. Electrical improvements at water treatment plant number 1, which is an aging facility initially constructed in 1979. So that's got some needed electrical improvements, $500,000, and then future wells and well fields for that or wells and well fields for that plant, which is mostly renewals and replacements, the $750,000 for fixing old wells. Water treatment plant number 2, there's the zero liquid discharge project. We currently, the water treatment plant number 2 is a low-pressure reverse osmosis plant. So the minerals in the water that come out of the wells is concentrated into what we call a concentrate stream, and that is currently discharged to the Royal Palms waterway. It's all well water with elements that are concentrated. The EPA has decided after about 20 years that they will not allow the DEP to renew that discharge permit, and gave us a time frame for which to plan and budget to change that discharge and do something else with the concentrate. We performed a study and looked at about 10 different alternatives, and the most viable alternative we came up with is the zero liquid discharge. Basically what that means is we're going to take that concentrate stream and we're going to put it through a post-treatment process, a lime softening and membrane filtration process. We're going to recover the liquid as drinking water, and the waste will be bound up in a lime sludge, which is an unregulated waste that can go to any landfill, or at water treatment plant number 1, we're currently using lime sludge. We ship it out to a local contractor who mixes it with Shell and uses it for road base. That particular zero liquid discharge project, which is mandated by the EPA, is a $10 million project, and hence the need for the initial proposed rate increase.
Mr. Mayor. Richard?
Yes, sir.
When was that study? When did you start working on that study to look at all those different options that were available?
I think we started that process about 4 years ago.
Richard, all of the dollars on this presentation, these are all capital dollars. In other words, this is equipment that we're going to buy, put it on our books as a capital asset, and write depreciation against it. So there's no labor charge encompassed in these numbers.
Well, that's correct. No internal labor. There is, any labor that's paid to contractors. So,
but that's not capital.
Yes, it is. When we build the zero liquid discharge project, it's a $10 million project. We will hire a contractor to come do all of that, the entire cost of that, including the contract, whatever the contractor charges, which obviously includes his labor and materials, all of that will be capitalized.
So all of the dollars on this presentation are either the total cost of an individual project, or it represents equipment and supplies that you're going to have to buy for replacement and repair.
That is correct. If it's contracted out, the labor gets capitalized. If it's done by in-house forces, obviously we don't capitalize the labor. So we might replace a $5,000 pump. That $5,000 purchase will get capitalized. The labor to install it by our own staff doesn't get that. That's in our normal operating expense.
Richard? Go ahead. I've heard it suggested that maybe the EPA has overstepped its bounds in terms of enforcing this and overriding the permitting process of the state of Florida. In your opinion, what's the probability of the EPA being challenged and overridden by popular uprising based on rate increases, et cetera?
Well, this is the Federal Environmental Protection Agency. This is a NPDES permit, National Pollution Elimination System permit, and it's always been an EPA oversight. The DEP is given the authority to permit within the EPA rules. So yes, it's a DEP permit, but it's how those permits are issued are mandated by the EPA, part of the Clean Water Act. Obviously, our first choice was to try to get relief from the EPA as opposed to doing this project. And we did that as far as we could go without some sort of filing some sort of lawsuit or some sort of long legal battle in the courts of Atlanta. We felt that it's really not in the best interest for the city to pursue changing the Clean Water Act, and so the best method is to follow the Clean Water Act, and that's the route in which we went that led us to this project.
Are neighboring counties under the same stipulations?
Actually, they are, yes. There's not a lot
So we're no
of them.
different than the
No,
other
there's not a lot of them in Florida that have this type of discharge permit. And we are one of a few, and the others are under the same mandates. That's correct.
Mayor, if I may piggyback on that comment, because this one is critical as far as the funding we need right now. EPA has made it very clear that one of their goals is to try to eliminate water waste discharge into a natural system. And in essence, what we are doing is taking the wastewater from our water plant 2, dumping it in a canal, which flows in the intercoastal. So the EPA has always had a goal of eliminating that. That is one of the primary purposes of the Clean Water Act. We've all seen the wastewater that comes out of the pipe into a river, and that trying to get that cleaned up. So this was always part of the long-term strategy of the EPA, and they haven't said you have to do it now, but they have said long-term you need to come up with a means of eliminating dumping that wastewater into the natural system. So, you know, we, as Richard said, have been planning for this for some time. The other part of it from an environmental standpoint is this is basically recycling that water. And that's the other reason why they are interested in this new technology or this new treatment system, because by using that wastewater, by recycling it and now making it potable water that we can then put into our drinking system, it reduces the amount of water we have to take out of the aquifer. It reduces our pumping needs. And therefore, those pumping needs, the concern is that it drains the aquifers down, which then impacts wetlands. So it's a combination of trying to reduce the amount of water we're taking out of the ground by recycling this product, and also eliminating the waste discharge into the intercoastal. To fight this would be like fighting one of the basic principles and one of the basic causes or reasons why we have the federal law of the Clean Water Act. Cities do fight it. And years later of spending a lot of dollars on technical expert witnesses and attorneys, EPA has traditionally won because of the Clean Water Act, the federal law. So I think that summary is kind of the crux of the matter as far as the idea that we would actually fight a federal law that has to do with environmental impacts. Just doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Richard, could you give us a guesstimate of how many gallons per day the Zero Liquid Discharge project will return to the system?
Initially, we will recover about 600,000 gallons a day. As wastewater treatment, or as water treatment plant number 2 expands, we'll ultimately recover about 1.2 million.
Okay. Now, that kind of ties into something I'd like to have you talk about a little bit. Water treatment plant number 1. It's an old plant. It's been there, got wells, pumping water into the plant, putting water out. Why do we need to spend money on wells and well fields for an existing plant that has an existing well field?
Well, that's funny you should ask. That is another regulatory-driven expenditure. After about 6 years of studies, engineering studies, we also had all kinds of environmentalists and all kinds of work done, we finally received a consumptive use permit from this water management district, St. Johns River Water Management District. We have a 20-year permit, but the allocation probably won't get us to 20 years, so we'll be back for a permit mod sometime before the 20 years is up. But in 2005, we got our initial consumptive use permit. But that permit came with lots of conditions. And some of those conditions included reducing the withdrawals from our existing wells. So water treatment plant number 2, for instance, initially had a well field capacity of over 6 million gallons a day, and that's the capacity of the plant. Under the new permit, that capacity is 4 million gallons a day, which means we've got to now put in some more wells. Basically spread out the withdrawals so that it doesn't, so that there are no surface water impacts on those, caused by those withdrawals. The consumptive use permit also has a very intensive and expensive monitoring requirement. So we have dozens of monitoring wells that are designed to monitor the wetlands and the aquifers to make sure our withdrawals don't have any negative impacts on the environment, particularly wetland drawdowns. So as a result of that monitoring and the strict guidelines that the Water Management District has put on this consumptive use permit, we're going to have to do some significant well field expansions, basically spread out the withdrawals and sip it out of the ground instead of suck it out in large quantities.
And I think just by way of background, we need to understand that in Florida, the Florida legislature determined many years ago that all water is owned by the state. Whether the well is in Palm Coast or Flagler Beach or Ormond Beach or St. Johns County, no matter where the wells are, the water is owned by the state, and the state regulates through these consumptive use permits where you can take it, how much you can take it, how fast you can take it. Again, this is a regulatorily driven. And one other thing, does a well last forever?
No, a well doesn't last forever. The well location can last forever if we do strictly monitor the withdrawals, and which we do, and we have proven over the last 40 years that monitoring those withdrawals and monitoring the health of the aquifers, we have sustainable withdrawals. But as a result of all of that monitoring activity, we have decided, and partly because the Water Management District has mandated so, but to reduce the withdrawals from each well. So the well can last forever, but the hardware, the infrastructure that pulls the water out of the ground, the well casing, the well screening, and the pumps and the control panels and the backup generators, they don't last forever. So those are also in the R&R, the renewals and replacements, part of the capital. And that's why you see $750,000 in the 5-year plan for wells and well fields at Water Treatment Plant number 1. That is mostly for rehab. And in this neck of the woods, mostly a coastal Florida phenomenon, most of our water comes from the confined superficial. The confined superficial is a sand shell layer that's only about 60 to 80 feet deep, and the only way to get water out of that ground is to install a gravel pack well. Those gravel pack wells have to be rehabbed about every 3 years or they lose their efficiency. So you'll start with maybe a 200-gallon-a-minute well. After about 3 years, it's down to probably 100 gallons a minute. You've got to pull all that hardware out of the ground. You've got to redevelop that well and put the hardware back in. So that is an expensive process that we have to go through on a regular basis.
Mayor, I think the bottom line is all the black numbers you see up there are not growth related. They are either regulatory driven, as regulatory requirements we're trying to meet, or they are just maintaining the current system. with capital projects that would allow us to maintain the system as it is today. The red numbers, as Richard goes through this, are the numbers that are required if we are to add capacity, in other words, growth related. And that's why we're trying to distinguish between those type of projects.
And I'd also like to take a brief moment for a public service announcement. These wells and well fields, I talked a lot about monitoring and withdrawals. And those are the same aquifers that people pull out of with their private wells. So when they choose to pull out of those private wells and irrigate like it's gone out of style, they're also withdrawing from those same aquifers that we're monitoring and having to cut back city production because they overwater. Everybody needs to be cognizant of the scarcity of fresh water in this part of the country, and we need to make sure that we use it wisely. Irrigate your lawn, but stick with the regulations, the guidelines that the city has established with their ordinances and the Water Management District has done with their rules. Moving along, water treatment plant number 3, that's our newest plant. And we actually have done the same thing as a zero liquid discharge, and we are now sending the concentrate from water treatment plant number 3 to water treatment plant number 1, where it's getting softened with the lime softening process and recovering that waste stream as well. We have a discharge permit for that plant, goes directly to the intracoastal. Up in the northern part of Palm Coast, we can actually meet the conditions of an NPDES permit because the discharge goes directly to a tidal flow, so we can meet the conditions of the permit with there, but we're recovering that water by recycling it to water plant 1. But as a result, we need to do this color reduction. We often get complaints about, they fill a bathtub full of water and it's got a yellow tint. So we're actually doing a study to find out how we can remove some of those organics that cause color in the water. We're still within the guidelines, the DEP rules, but it does have color, and that's an aesthetic thing. Then in the future for Plant 3, obviously some additional wells and well fields, same thing. We're trying to spread that withdrawals out so that we don't have any negative impacts on the wetlands. And membrane replacements, those are the membranes that treat the water, and obviously those have to be replaced on a regular basis. And then we talk about plant expansion. That's a growth-related thing, and as we talk about this rate study and how some of your options are, the growth obviously is based on projections. According to our engineering projections, we're going to need to start thinking about the next plant expansion, water treatment plant number 3. Towards the end of the 5-year plan, we'll start the design process for plant expansion. That 1.5 is only design, that's not construction. Moving along, water distribution, there's a number of mostly roadway-related projects. When you're in there doing a roadway, that's the time to make improvements to utilities, not after all the pavement is laid. So we have some roadway widening-related capital improvements for utility. One of them, which is going on right now, Pine Lakes Parkway, about $200,000 worth of improvements in the water distribution system on Pine Lakes Parkway, where it's currently being widened. The sidewalks are being put in, and the undergrounding of Florida Power and Light lines. So that project, we have a water main that's going to do some relocation. And then we have kind of an allowance for miscellaneous distribution and system improvements. Every year we find, something that needs to be done, a piece of water main that needs to be replaced or that type of thing. And then in the future, out in the years 3 through 5, we are anticipating a couple of other major water line improvements. The citation to Old Kings Road Loop is what gets us to move more water from Plant 2 up to the eastern side of Palm Coast, up to 100 and on up Culvert Lane. Old Kings Road Phase 2, related miscellaneous, that's mostly design and planning. And then, again, the allowance for miscellaneous distribution.
Richard?
Yes, sir.
Renewal and replacements. On the previous slide, you listed wellheads to the tune of $8.7 million going out to 2017. This renewal and replacements is not wellheads.
That's correct. This is general. We have about $500,000 a year budgeted for renewal and replacements, and that'll be everything from a replacement pump to replacement motors, miscellaneous stuff that comes up during the year that we have an allowance. Basically, it's an allowance for replacing, rather than sometimes pumps can't be rebuilt; they have to be replaced. So that comes out of that, and we'll budget about $500,000 each in water and $500,000 in sewer each year.
On the previous slide, how much of that $8.7 million is the repair and renovation of existing wellheads, and how much of it is new wells that you're planning to drill, roughly?
I don't have that right off the top of my head. I'd have to go back and
Half
look
of
at
it, a fourth, a third?
Well, it depends. On Water Plant 1, it's all renewal and replacements because that well field is in existence. Water treatment plant number 2, it's mostly expansion. The water treatment plant number 2, we're actually in the Florida aquifer, and the R&R requirements for those wells isn't as high as it is for the shallow aquifer wells. The future years, 15 to 17, in plant 2 is mostly new wells. And then plant 3 is predominantly new wells because the wells serving plant 3 are fairly new to begin with. That plant went online in 2008.
Thank you.
And then wastewater treatment plant number 1, in our first couple of years, there's a couple of miscellaneous improvements. Mostly that's rotted, rusted equipment that needs to be replaced, and the rapid infiltration basins need to be reworked. The effluent that leaves the wastewater treatment plant used predominantly for irrigation, and when it starts raining and people stop irrigating, we put it in rapid infiltration basins where it's allowed to percolate back into the ground. Those rapid infiltration basins need some rehab work. That's actually planned for this year. And then in the future, again, a regulatory-driven project, and that is kind of sitting in the wings waiting for us to do it when we figure out what the final regulations are going to be. But upgrading that particular $7.2 million project is budgeted for upgrading 1/3 of the wastewater plant to advanced waste treatment, which will allow us to increase the amount of discharge to the intercoastal on wet weather situations. So that number is kind of, we're anticipating it'll be required, but we don't know for sure. So that's in the years 3 through 5.
Richard?
Yes, sir.
We're waiting for that because of the numeric nutrient
That's
count
correct.
and the settlement of the DEP lawsuit and all that, and when they come up with the final rule.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. It's actually the design, what we have designed and ready to go for the $7.2 million is a project to upgrade 1/3 of the plant to AWT, advanced waste treatment, so that we can increase our wet weather discharge. However, we don't want to go through that expense, upgrade that plant, until we know what the NNC rule is going to be, because that could change the whole plan. So we're kind of waiting for that to happen. But we do need to increase our wet weather discharge limitation, and we're anxious to get that done, but really it's wise to hold up until the NNC rule. And then wastewater treatment plant number 2, that's in red because that's, as we discussed, based on projected population growth. We think we're going to need the next wastewater plant in somewhere near the end of the 5-year plan. One of the options is to push that into year 6 or 7 in anticipation that the growth won't occur as at the rate that the engineers or the BEBR is projecting, but more flat growth, closer to the BEBR low number, I guess you could say. And then we have a couple of reclaimed water projects, and it's important for us to move that effluent out of the plant and send it to be reused for irrigation. The big one is the Matanzas Woods Parkway reclaimed line that would move reclaimed water from wastewater treatment plant number 1 over to US 1 where it could be used for irrigation. And by the way, we can sell that for irrigation once it's out there. And then the Seminole Woods Parkway project is to get partway down to Grand Landings, where that community is built with a reuse system, anxiously awaiting for us to deliver reuse to them so they can irrigate their properties with reuse instead of well water. Then pump stations, we have somewhere in the neighborhood of 140 or 150 pump stations out there. Many of them are old and need constant upgrades, and there's a couple of very large upgrades, pump station 4-2, and that's a big one. And the miscellaneous pump station upgrades, that we'll pick a number of those projects each year to upgrade those stations as their pumps start getting overtaken by additional flow. We'll upgrade the pumps. Control panels will also upgrade the appearance of them. A lot of them have been fenced and landscaped. You may have noticed those in your neighborhoods. Odor control systems, as the flows increase, the odor increases, so we have budgeted a couple of odor control systems each year. And then the beachside sewer project, for which we're currently working on right now, and will take on Flagler County as a new customer. And again, the 2015-17 in red is the Matanzas Wood Master Pump Station, which is the project that will turn the wastewater flow around and send it over to some of the flow over to the brand new wastewater treatment plant. So that goes hand in hand with the wastewater treatment plant number 2. And the Old Kings Road Master Pump Station, that one is one that we know is going to have to be upgraded, and we've pushed it out to 2015 to 2017. Don't feel we can push it any further than that. It's really, really working its capacity right now. And again, in the years 3 through 5, we have additional odor control systems, miscellaneous upgrades, and emergency generators, so that we can continue to pump wastewater when the power goes out, like in a storm situation. And nobody wants wastewater when there's a storm. And then there's force mains. There's the Old Kings Road Phase 2, which who knows if and when that project will happen, and that's out into 2015 and 2017. However, we can't wait for the 4-laning in the Old Kings Road. We've got to upgrade that force main. So if the 4-laning gets pushed out much further than that, we're going to have to move ahead with that force main so we can move the sewer, whether it's 4-laned or not. And then there's just annual work on the collection system, new PEP tanks and collections PEP system upgrades, new larger pipes, bigger pumps, and new PEP tanks to serve new customers. We have an amount budgeted each year for that. And then your general plant R&R on the wastewater side, again, $500,000 a year budgeted for R&R. And miscellaneous small capital projects that are actually exactly what it says, small capital projects. So that's the capital plan, and basically where most of the money will go.
Any more questions for Mr. Adams? Okay. Chris, what's next?
We have Mark Galvin next, who's our financial advisor relating to all of our debt. And he's going to talk a little bit about the bond rating agencies and our bond credit rating.
For the record, my name is Mark Galvin. I'm with First Southwest Company in Orlando, financial advisor to the city. Thank you for this opportunity to be able to speak to you today. What I'm going to try to do is go over a little bit of a presentation, a little bit less complicated, hopefully, than what I've shown you previously, but make sure that I go over some of the key points. one of the key things is that as financial advisor, what we do is we constantly reviewing the city's outstanding debt and looking for debt service savings. We've already refunded one of the financings for the CRA to save the city money, and one of the ones that we have been working with the city on is on the refunding the Series 2003 bonds. Right now, if we just were strictly doing a refunding all by itself, the city would save approximately $500,000 per year and $11 million over the life of the issue. And as part of one of the things that we do, too, is that we know that we're going to have to go eventually to the rating agencies, and we also want to make sure that a bond issue is expensive. So therefore, you want to make sure that if you're moving forward with a transaction, you're looking at the entire capital improvement program. Is there anything else you need to finance? Because the last thing you want to do is do a financing this year and then found out, oh, well, gee, we ended up having some improvements we would have liked to have been able to finance, but we're going to now have to wait to another time and send more additional funds. The other thing that we try to do, too, once we end up getting an idea of what the capital improvements, and one of the things that the city told us, is that they had approximately about $21 million worth of improvements that they think that they would like to be able to fund, is to find ways to be able to keep your debt service low as possible. And what we try to do is also maintain future financing flexibility associated with this. So while there's debt service savings, we want to make sure it's structured in a way as to be able to allow for additional bonds in the future. The other thing we try to do, too, is that our goal is to make sure we realize that anything that we do here could possibly impact rates and also the water and sewer customers. So our goal is to try to be able to find and structure this as the most cost-effective way, so therefore it has the least amount of impact to the bottom line and ultimately to the rate payers. And so originally what we looked at here is that we had a $21 million capital improvement project. If we were just going to finance $21 million worth of capital improvements, your debt service in this extremely low interest rate environment would be about $1.4 million per year. But because one of the things that we mentioned to the city is that you have an opportunity based upon our conversation with our underwriting desk and their investors, that if you're able to stay in the high A category with your rating agencies, bondholders will not require a debt service reserve. And if you can do that, you could free approximately $6.2 million that's currently being held that in 2010 you're required to fund up. We could take $6.2 million and reduce the amount of funds that you have to borrow, therefore being able to save you additional debt service and also reducing the impact to the water and sewer ratepayers. So once again, our goal on putting together the financing plan, if we're able to maintain strong enough ratings, is to be able to refinance, provide you $21 million worth of additional funds, take advantage of the savings of $500,000 per year in debt service savings. So technically, you're getting the benefit of $21 million worth of projects for about $400,000 to $500,000 more than you currently are paying right now. That is the way we're trying to do to be able to reduce the impact on the city's water and sewer rates payers. Currently,
Mark, all of that was roughly $1 million to $1.1 million less annually if we were to just be looking at new money, correct?
That's correct. Now, one thing we also are trying to do here, too, is that as we looked at the ratings, is that you're currently rated, you've got a split rating, as we call it in the industry, where you got Moody's and Fitch have you at the high end of the A category, A1 and A+. Standard & Poor's has you down one notch lower at A. The series in 2003 and 2007, as Chris had talked about before, those had, when I say the word underlying, I mean your own personal credit rating. Your credit rating, that is your credit rating right now, A1, A+, A for the utility issues. Back in 2003, when we were looking at doing these bonds, the industry, while that was important, people were buying bonds based upon bond insurance. They wanted AAA bond insurance, so therefore they knew they had a big corporation, a big insurance company that was going to guarantee their debt. And that's what we did, is that we went out and it was cost effective for you to go ahead and purchased bond insurance from MBIA. MBIA at that time was one of close to 9 AAA rated bond insurance that provided that type of service. And because of that, you were able to get very cost-effective rates. Now, unfortunately, what's happened is that because of the credit crisis, and these rating agencies have all been downgraded. In fact, there's only one bond insurance currently right now doing business in the state of Florida, and that's Assured Guarantee. And as you can see by looking at their ratings, they're rated A2, AA minus from Fitch and Moody's. From Moody's and S&P. As you can see, your ratings are higher than theirs. In fact, Fitch they don't even rate them anymore. So what's happened is that bond insurance is no longer a cost-effective. Now, as your financial advisor, we will go through and still go through that process to see whether or not we can somehow squeeze some value out of the bond insurance. But bond investors have been burned, so therefore they're doing their own analysis, and those that don't have the staff and capability are relying on the rating agencies to be able to show whether or not it's a quality investment. Do they want to purchase your bonds? The more people that want your bonds, the more competitive it is, lower interest rates, and hopefully that means lower debt service savings on it.
Mark, again, I'm going to just try to clarify. When we purchased the bond insurance previous, it was to elevate our bond rating to help us get a lower rate. And now the bond insurer actually has a lower rating than us. So it's less likely that we'll find a cost savings there because they will not actually elevate our ratings and will not get us a better rate.
The only way that they become even an alternative is that if you get downgraded, and then we'll have to do the cost of, analysis at that point. But obviously right now, you don't have to pay that high cost of bond insurance based upon your current ratings.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and so again, the whole goal as the financial advisor is to try to at least provide alternatives with the idea of lowering your interest rates and making the impact on your debt service low as possible. Yes, sir.
I just thought of a question that would come to my mind if I were only interested in one thing, and that is, what would the impact be of, what was the impact of paying for bond insurance in the past on an individual utility bill? How much did that elevate each individual utility bill, perhaps? Is there some estimate that you could give?
Well, I mean, I can go back and look historically. I don't have that information now. The difference is that there's a difference between bonds that trade with A rating are here, bonds that trade at AAA or, the other way around, lower.
But to somebody turning on their faucet and flushing their toilet, they don't care about bond ratings. They want to know about what the rate of impact is.
I mean, it depends. It could have been, like I said, it could have been 50, 60, 70 basis points more difference between an A-rated standalone back then and, let's say, a AAA insurance.
I'm trying to find a formula that you can translate from that to an individual monthly bill.
There's no way that I can help you with that.
Okay.
One thing, though, that I also want to say is that when we talk about the flexibility, is that if we're able to get these investors to agree not to need a debt service reserve, it doesn't just help us on this bond issue, but we also have the 2007 bonds that are going to be coming up for refunding, which hopefully will be able to reduce and relieve that about another $3 million worth of a reserve. It will also help when you deal with the 2014 and 15 bonds, whatever the next bond issue, that will help you. Just like your ratings will also make a difference as far as for future bond issues. So when I mention flexibility and long term, I'm not just looking at this issue. I'm looking at the benefits that might be available to you further on down the road.
Mayor, if I may interject and maybe help with Mr. Ferguson's question, because a utility is so capital intense and it has so much invested in the capital infrastructure, from the plants to the pump stations to the pipes in the ground. Mr. Galvin's job, and why we hire him, is to try to reduce the amount of cost for the whole system when it comes to paying for that capital cost. So that's really what the whole goal here is to try to keep that cost down as low as possible. And just like in the private sector, when you have capital items, you pay it out over time, and therefore, how can we reduce the amount of interest we pay? And in this case, you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars a year. A good example is, and I think that the refinancing, it kind of goes, takes a back seat to the rates. The refinancing package, and Mark, help me out exactly the number, but we're talking about for the balance of the term of that 2000 issuance, saving over $6 million in interest, if I recall. Is that the number?
The current savings is close to $11 million.
$11 million,
over the
okay.
life of the issue.
Okay, so major deal, but only if we take advantage of the low interest rates we have now, and we also keep the bond rating high. So this is all about major costs for the utility, and that cost is being paid for by the ratepayers. So if we do a good job in keeping the capital costs down, then the ratepayers benefit. Exactly how much they benefit by that, then that's the formula that's almost impossible. But that's what Mark's job is to see what we can do to keep those costs down. And we're talking millions of dollars.
Go back to the concept that at least Palm Coast has said we want a break-even enterprise fund. We don't want to make a profit. We certainly don't want to lose money. But if you can save $11 million, we could probably do some kind of figuring, but that's $11 million less that you have to raise in rates or collect in rates.
Correct. Correct. And that's just for one bond issuance.
And one thing, too, is that the importance of being able not to fund this debt service reserve is that if we are lowered and we have to fund a debt service reserve, not only do we lose the $6 million that we were going to transfer over, that means you have to borrow another $6.2 million. But also your debt service reserve is going to have to be funded even higher because your debt service is going up. So you're going to have to throw another $1 million into the project, borrow another $1 million, in which if you have to invest it, it's going to be at the great rate of, what you're getting, Chris, about 1% or?
Short term is a grand total of 0.2%.
Right. So, I mean, one of the benefits is that not only for this issue, but future issues, you're not having to fund that debt service reserve and increase it over a period of time. Also, a downgrade will have an impact. If Moody's and Fitch both decide to go ahead and downgrade you, then you're talking about at least, not only won't you be able to move forward with the debt service reserve, you have to fund the debt service reserve, but your interest rates are going to go up by about 15 basis points, which is going to increase your overall debt service. And it's not going to just impact this deal, it's going to impact future deals. So one thing I want to say is that, this rate study and this analysis right here will be, depending on what you approve, will be reviewed by the rating agencies and by bond investors. And a strong one is done by PRMG will be viewed favorably by the rating agencies and by bond investors. I think there is no guarantee that they're going to wouldn't downgrade you anyway, but it should be viewed very strongly by the rating agency as a positive thing. In addition, I'm saying right now, if you are downgraded, we're still going to finance this thing. I mean, you guys have good credit. I'm just trying to be able to reduce the impact it's going to be on your debt service, which overall is going to end up taking more pressure off of the ratepayers. And so that is my presentation. If anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
You don't anticipate downgrading any time coming our way, do you?
I'm sorry.
You don't anticipate any downgrading coming our way?
I would hope that if you have the rates that you're at least being proposed, that should make the rating agencies feel comfortable. I feel comfortable that, based upon that analysis, that you should be able to maintain your current ratings. But obviously, I'm saying this as my personal opinion. I have no idea. The rating agency looks at lots of different things when they end up doing their analysis. But having a the city go through this process, looking at the capital improvement program, not just for this year, but for 5 years, having the rates established so they know exactly what type of rate increases they're going to need in the future, with the elected officials agreeing to approve these rates. It's looked very, very favorably by the rate agencies.
But Mark, on the other hand, if these rates, do the rate study, if City Council does not adopt rates similar to what's in the rate study, what's the chances of our bond rating, credit rating going down?
Well, I think there's probably a good chance, and part of it too is that even though, based upon the rate study that was prepared, you're going to have to borrow more often. And one of the things that the rating agencies had put in their previous rating reports is that you guys were extremely highly leveraged. And so therefore, they would see this as an opportunity, or seeing you guys are going to, because you haven't raised the rates high enough, you're going to have to keep on borrowing more and more in the future, which will be viewed negatively, in my opinion.
Other questions?
Thank you.
Simple analogy.
I'm sorry.
If you were going to invest in a business, wouldn't you rather invest in a business that's showing a profit rather than one that's losing money? We need to set the rates so that at the very least we can meet our debt service, meet our capital requirements, meet our R&R, meet our operations. Because we're asking people to invest in this utility, in essence. Buy our bonds, you're investing in us. So we need to present a business plan, if you will, that suggests that they will be able to get their money back.
Absolutely. Investors have a lot of money, and they have lots of opportunities to invest in lots of different bond issues, and they pick and choose the ones that they feel are the best investments for them.
Okay. Chris?
Okay, I'm going to ask Jeff from PRMG to come on up, and he's going to go through the process of the actual rate study that was performed and summarize some of the options that we've spoken about at the last council workshop. Jeff?
Hi, good morning. Jeff Wilson from PRMG. This is basically the same presentation as the city manager has said before that we've given, I think, 3 or 4 times now, but we wanted to make the public aware of the process that we take in coming up with the proposed rate adjustments that we're proposing today. The first step we do is we develop a financial forecast for the water and wastewater system. We look at the customer stats, project revenues, capital improvement funding, and develop a total revenue requirements for the system, then look at the adequacy of the existing system rates. So the rate study also took into account rate design, meaning we didn't just propose these increases across the board. We looked at each customer class and water and sewer separately and designed rates for them specifically. We also looked at the bulk water and wastewater charges and the capital facilities fees. We also were asked to address other options and questions, and we discussed those at the last City Council workshop. And then we'll get into our conclusions and recommendations. Okay. As Mark, the financial planner, announced, we prepared this in anticipation of the Series 2013 bonds. The financial forecast recognizes a period of 2013 through 2017. We want to fully fund all system expenditures, and we develop a capital improvement financing plan, and we establish rates sufficient to support the issuance of the Series 2013 bonds. And the rates are also designed to meet the rate covenants defined in the bond resolution, as Mark has talked about, and maintain the financial stability of the system and maintain a favorable credit rating. Okay. As Richard talked about in his presentation, he has a lot of capital improvement projects coming up, and here's a list of what the 2013 bonds will be funding. We have the water treatment plant improvements for plant number 1, and the majority of them are for plant number 2, about $12 million. Also some for plant number 3. Also, water mains of $2.1 million, wastewater treatment plant number 1 of $1 million, and lift station and pump stations of $1.7 million. Okay. As stated before, the issuance of the Series 2013 bonds requires preparation of a financial forecast, adoption of utility rates, and preparation of a bond feasibility report. Excuse me. Okay. And it's important to mention that the debt will be payable from the pledge revenues of the system and capital facilities fees, impact fees, and no tax revenues will be used to support the debt. Now we'll get into our customer statistics and revenue projections. During fiscal year 2012, the city served on average 42,000 water accounts and 35,000 sewer accounts. Historically, the customer growth for the system had been strong, about 11% per year for 2000 through 2006. And as everybody knows, that's declined dramatically over the last 5 years. It's now less than 1%. The utility customer growth projections that we've included in the forecast are a little less than 1% or 100 connections per year. It's also important to point out that the customer usage has been relatively consistent, hasn't dropped that much. But customers in the city don't use that much per month, about 4,100 gallons per month of water usage. The projected revenues that we have from the existing rates of the system were based on that forecast of customer growth and the current rates and charges as adopted by the city. Now, I wanted to point out that we take a bottom-up approach to developing the needs of the system. We look at this, what we call the revenue requirements of the system. We look at operating expenses, debt service payments, capital funded from operations, then any kind of deposits to your working capital or debt compliance that's necessary. But then we subtract out other operating revenues and income, use of working capital fund balances, to help that all comes to equate to the net revenue requirements funded from rates. It's important to note that all these goals are in order to maintain the City Council's fund balance policy, maintain rate covenant compliance, and maintain a favorable bond rating. Okay. The first component of the revenue requirements is the operating expenses. And it's important to mention that the rate increases proposed today aren't really a result of the operating expenses of the system. It was pointed out that the city's done a tremendous job of controlling the operating expenses over the years. So the main driver of these rate increases are the proposed capital improvement plan that's been talked about. But we did base our expense projections on the 2013 adopted budget. Forecast recognized different expenses were increased by sales and flows, like your electric cost and chemical cost, and other inflationary allowances over the 5-year forecast of 1.5 to 3.5%. Also have included labor cost increases and personnel additions, 8 positions over the forecast period. Majority of those, 6 of those out of the 8, are related to the wastewater treatment plant number 2. And we'll show you as an option later on that if we choose a second option, we've removed 6 of those positions that are related to wastewater treatment plant number 2. And we also include a contingency allowance of 3% for unanticipated expenses. And here's an overview of the total capital improvement program over the 5 years. You can see the city has budgeted $78.4 million of total capital improvement projects. You can see the breakdown between water and wastewater, $27 million for the water system, $45 million for the wastewater system, then miscellaneous projects of about $5 million. Now, this bottom half of this is related to how we go about funding that. And you can see that renewal and replacement funding, that will be important, that we'll talk about later on, is only funding a small portion of that. That's $15.8 million over the forecast period. Most of the projects are anticipated to be funded with future bonds. You can see the Series 2013 bonds are going to fund 15 million of those, but also it's going to release the 2003 bond debt service reserve fund of 6.2 million. So that's $21 million that's going to be funded by this upcoming refinancing. And the Series 2014-15 bonds is another $38.9 million. One of the main drivers of these proposed rate increases is the annual transfer for renewal and replacements. You can see a bond resolution requires a minimum of 5%, and that's just a minimum. Our forecast recognizes a 10% per year contribution to the renewal and replacement fund, and that's about $3 million per year. And to put that in perspective to the housing scenario that we talked about before, the city currently has $200 million in net assets out there in the ground. So if you had a house, say, of $100,000 a year, that $100,000 house value, that equates to about $1,500 a year for annual renewal and replacement, which really isn't that significant when you think about replacing your AC, your carpet, your roof over that time period. Now, the Series 2013 bonds provide about $15 million in new project funding, which really is going to increase your debt service. That's the other main component of this increase, about $400,000 to $500,000 per year. We also have out there a 2014 and 15 bond of about $43 million projected for October 1st, 2014. Excuse me. And that's about $3.1 million in additional debt service payments. So here's the adequacy of system. Excuse me. The overall system identified required rate adjustments are 8% immediately, 7% for this upcoming next year, and 7% for the following year. The 2% and the 2.2% for 2016 and 2017 actually represent annual indexing adjustments, and they may vary depending on what inflation is at that time. The reason for the proposed rate adjustments are a lack of system growth affecting the ability to absorb rates. Growth can help offset the future rate increases, and a lack of funding sources from capital facilities fees. We hope to see those pick up in the future because that had been a significant portion of how capital projects were funded in the past. Again, a small amount related to continuing inflationary impacts on cost of operations, and the majority of the increase is the need to fund capital improvements to the system for regulatory requirements, the ZLD project, and increased debt service requirements associated with additional utility system revenue bonds. We also look at the system has to have sufficient revenues to meet the bond issuance requirements, maintain financial creditworthiness, and favorable bond ratings. And as we talked about earlier, increase in the annual transfer to the renewal and replacement fund. We're recommending 5% to 10% per year of gross revenues. This reduces future debt requirements, improves long-term utility financial position, is viewed favorably by the rating agencies, and provides rate flexibility. Okay. One of the reasons mentioned is to maintain the creditworthiness of the system, and this shows what our debt service coverage calculations come out to be. And again, this is a fallout number based on all the revenue requirements that we've identified. It's not a number that we plug in that the system has to meet 150 coverage to get a favorable rating, but your system does happen to have good coverages based on those net revenue requirements. You can see it ranges there, senior link coverage from 157 to 155, and all-in debt service coverage ranges from 130 to 135 over the forecast. We'd like to have it a little higher, but again, we don't plug in rate increases just to get to those coverage amounts. Fitch, when they look at A-rated utility, would prefer the median average to be 1.4 times. Again, we did not propose these increases to go across the board to all customers. We actually developed rates independently for water and wastewater customers and by class of service. We allocated the revenue requirements to the water and wastewater system first. Then we allocated those individual revenue requirements between base and usage charges. The future proposed 2014 and 2015 rates are recommended to be applied uniformly across the board. Okay. And we'll get into the different levels. So overall, the water and wastewater system increase is 8%, but the water system, we're recommending a 3.27% increase and an overall wastewater system increase of 15.61%. As a breakdown between water base and usage charges, we have an overall water system increase of 3.27%, but the base charges are only going to go up 2.21%, and the usage charges are going up 4.05%. On the wastewater side, it's a little more dramatic. Overall increase of 15.61%, but the base charges were low relative to the usage charges, so we're recommending they be increased 19.6% as opposed to usage charges of 11.87%. And here's a impact on the various customer classes. The first is the residential class. They will see an increase of $4.61 per month. And the multifamily class slightly higher at $6.77 per month. Commercial class is different, various meter sizes. A 5/8 meter will see a $7.80 increase per month, and see a larger 1-inch meter at 15,000 gallons is $22.21 per month. And the irrigation class, $1.69 per month based on 4,000 gallons of usage. Here's a comparison of you with other neighboring utilities. You can see that the proposed rates are right in the middle there, right where it's comparable with all the surrounding communities. It's going up slightly. We also, like we said, prepared a bulk water and wastewater rate study, looked at system-wide revenue requirements that are applicable to bulk service. City currently provides bulk water service to Flagler County, Beverly Beach area. City will provide bulk wastewater service to Flagler County, Beverly Beach area in the future. City's existing bulk rates were originally developed for the Dunes Community Development District, who's no longer a customer of the city. And these were designed for specific circumstances applicable to only the Dunes Development District and not to other bulk users. The the bulk wastewater is, or the bulk water is projected to go from $2.19 to $4.08 per 1,000 gallons. That's an 86.3% increase. And wastewater is projected to go from $3.22 to $3.55. And since it was such a large increase, we decided to estimate the impact of that on the typical Beverly Beach residential customer. It's not as dramatic as the overall increase because it only represents a small portion of their cost. So you can see the estimated impact to a Beverly Beach customer would be about 11.14% or $11.10 per month. Okay. And for capital facilities fees or new connections or impact fees that you charge to new customers, the rates were last established in 2007, as Richard showed, based on a large capital improvement program at that time. So we're looking at the rates now the city should charge based on the lower capital improvement program. And we're actually recommending a reduction to these fees because the CIP has dropped dramatically. So we're recommending the water fees drop from $2,679 down to $2,045, and the same type of decrease for the wastewater system from $2,700 down to $2,265. So you can see that you're still a little bit slightly above what neighboring communities charge, but it's more in line with what they charge. And we're also recommending a 20% reduction to the proposed fees above for properties that become Florida Star certified properties. And here's a comparison of you to the other neighboring communities. You can see the existing rates are up there towards the high end of the chart, but with the new proposed rates, it becomes more in line with the system average. Another modification the city asked us to look at is the annual indexing provision. You can see the changes in bold that would be put into the resolution. Since we're asking for rates to be established for 3 years, you won't need to start annual indexing your rates until October 1st, 2015. But we also wanted to add in a section down below that for rates like capital facilities fees and connection fees, those should be indexed annually based on construction cost index. And since we're not changing those every year for 3 years, that you can start annually indexing those on October 1st, 2013. Okay. And now to the options that we talked about and addressed from the community. We talked about them at the last workshop. Like to let the public know what was considered, what kind of options were considered. One of the questions is, what if we reduced our renewal and replacement funding from 10% to 5%? And we went over the impact of that in detail. But yes, you could do that, but that would result in just a temporary, one-time, short-term rate decrease for the customers. You'd eventually have to keep borrowing and increasing your debt level for renewal and replacement projects, and it would eventually result in permanently higher rates to the city residents. It also reduces your debt service coverage and a possible reduction in your credit rating. We also asked what rate adjustments are required immediately. The city could adopt a 2-year rate adoption plan. Instead of 877, you could adopt 87 and just leave the third one out there for later. But that's not viewed favorably by the credit rating agencies because they like more certainty, or that the city's willing to commit to those increases over time. Okay. Another question was, why was the current rate phasing strategy chosen, and are there any alternative rate phasing strategies that could be considered? And what about 5% every year instead of the 877? And we showed you the impact of that and how if we put those in, how the cash flows of the city became negative over the 5-year period of time, and you really wouldn't have adequate cash balances to maintain that type of phasing structure. So we wouldn't recommend that. You'd be forced to reduce your renewal and replacement funding. Also, question that was asked, what if senior lien debt service coverage was lowered to 140 instead of 150? And again, we don't plug into our forecast a 150 coverage. The 150 is just a result of meeting the revenue requirements. So again, we showed you that the cash flows of the system, if we did that, would become negative, and the city wouldn't have adequate cash to fund that type of 140 coverage. So you'd actually be forced to reduce your renewal and replacement funding. Then also asked, what if we increased our revenue growth projections over the forecast for additional customer growth? Again, we wouldn't recommend this. Our customer growth was based on the recent customer growth trends. The better alternative would be to reduce the capital plan for all growth-related projects. Then it's also been asked, what might be the impact on rates if the system was downgraded by the rating agencies? And the overall impact of that would be to increase the monthly rates by about 1.75%, or about $1.60 per month. Okay. And here is a viable option that we proposed, or we didn't propose, but we answered the question to last time, and it is a viable option for the city to consider. It's, what if we adjusted the capital improvement plan to push out all the growth-related projects beyond the forecast period? So the city identified those growth-related projects for us of about $24 million. And you can see column 1 there is the 877 that we've recommended. If we did that, the rate increases, if we remove those growth-related projects, the rate increases would drop down to 844, and you can see the impact on the typical monthly bill to the customer. But this would result in the need to evaluate rates probably every 2 years, or by fiscal year 2015 again. And the potential risk for this option is the city may not be able to adjust rate program in time as the plan accelerates. Potential interest rate risk due to delay in financing. And I wanted to mention, if the wastewater plant is required during the forecast period, the city may need to adjust rates an additional 6%. Okay. Conclusions and recommendations. The existing rates are not projected to be adequate to meet the system expenditures throughout the forecast period. Rate increases are necessary to fund the capital plan and issue bonds and maintain the creditworthiness of the system. The financial forecast recognizes the need for proposed rate adjustments. The city should adopt the proposed rates, either the first option or the second option, for fiscal year 2013 to be effective April 1st, 2013, based on the proposed cost allocation analysis. Then the city should also adopt the proposed rate adjustments for fiscal year 2014 and 15, either the first option or the second option that we've laid out. City should also adopt the proposed decrease in capital facilities fees effective immediately, February 19th. Council should adopt the proposed bulk water and wastewater rates. And based on that, as Mark stated, if proposed rates should be adequate to comply with the rate covenant requirements and defined in the city's bond resolution, maintain the fund balance policy of the city, and maintain the current bond rating. I'll open up to any questions.
Council questions?
No matter which option we were to choose, the first year would be at least 4.61. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then we'll have to look at the end of the second year, evaluating what our needs are from that point forward.
Right.
Other council questions? Mr. DiLorenzo.
Jeff, the R&R, the increasing the R&R from 5% to 10%. I believe what you said was at 5%, we are spending more than we're currently spending more than 5%, and that's why we need to raise it. Otherwise, we will renewal and replacement we would have to borrow for, and that's one of the key components of this.
Pointed out, yeah, the city has a $78 million CIP over the next 5 years, so to fund $15 million or $3 million a year for 5 years, that's only a small portion of the total system needs. So you can look at it as renewal and replacement, or just the amount that you want rates to fund out of your capital improvement program, and it's really a small portion that most of it is still coming from debt funding. So the city definitely has a need for all those renewal and replacement projects, and even additional projects could be funded from rates over time, but we know that there's a balance between the impact that you can charge customers to cash fund that CIP and the amount that you want to debt fund. So we've tried to balance those two.
Thanks for the clarification.
Mayor.
Mr. Ferguson.
I'm sitting here thinking to myself, as a proponent of growth in Palm Coast and in Flagler County, to spread the tax burden across more users of such services, I'm wondering if that's good or bad. Because if we have more customers, yeah, we spread the cost. However, we're going to have to put in more facilities to accommodate the growth, which will raise the capital plan. So I'm confused a little bit about whether I'm rooting for growth and want it to happen, and whether the citizens want it, which is another issue by itself, and what this means to what my monthly bill for utilities will be. Is there any opinion or comment you care to offer?
I know that is a complicated issue, because yes, growth can offset your rates, but you have to put in new facilities. So that's kind of the situation that we're, unfortunately, everybody doesn't connect right away, so you have to build the facilities before everybody connects to the system. But that's kind of the situation here, is that if you adopt the 877, it's probably a good bet that growth would be beneficial to everyone, and because those facilities are already in place. If you adopt the 844, then growth, everybody will be rooting for growth, but growth won't be as beneficial there because you haven't included those facilities into your rate plan, so it probably would result in higher rates for the citizens.
So the issue becomes a pro-growth issue then, perhaps.
Right.
Well, of course, growth generates revenue not only for the utility, but it generates revenue for your ad valorem property taxes. And what kind of growth? We have bandied this about for years in Flagler County. A sustainable community has, and you can pick numbers, 80% residential, 20% non-residential. Flagler County, we're about 2% non-residential. So all the costs of providing services at the county level, at the city level, are primarily on the back of the residential taxpayer. If you can get growth in the non-residential component, totally different picture.
Another question.
Mr. Lewis.
Jeff, the second option, what is that a 5% reduction in the R&R in the second option?
No, that still maintains a 10% R&R funding.
It does.
Yes.
It's a push out of the growth-related. Other questions?
And then in the year 14-15, the 4% that we listed there, that's the reduction in terms of the R&R. And if that is, what sort of impact will that have if we pull back on those improvements?
It's not a reduction in the R&R, it's actually a reduction in or push out of the growth-related projects or waste. Most of it's wastewater treatment plant number 2. So it's the debt service. That was going to be debt funded out in the future, and we showed you that we had planned about $38 million in future projects to be funded from debt. So if Richard can push those projects out or growth holds off, then we could lower that future debt down to, say, $15 million. So it's a lot less debt service during that time period. That's why we're able to lower those increases from 7% to 4%. But so it's not R&R project related. It's just pushing out projects that were going to be debt funded in the future.
But pushing those projects out will not be a negative impact on growth.
It wouldn't be a negative impact on growth, but those projects, as we get to if you go to the next slide, if those projects, if growth comes, then if those projects have to be accelerated, citizens have to realize that may result in an additional 6% increase in rates because they haven't been incorporated into your capital plan.
Right.
Mr. Mayor, if I may make a comment on the renewal and replacement fund. It makes it appear that there are these new renewal and replacement projects that we're looking to begin funding when we're just continuing our renewal and replacement program. As mentioned earlier, the 5% number is the minimum required by our bond covenants. We've been spending in excess of that 5% every year for the past probably 3 or 4 years at least. And these are items that some of the things we just don't have a choice on, as Mr. Adams had mentioned earlier, things of the nature of pumps and electrical panels and critical infrastructure to the system that if we don't fix and we don't spend the money to fix and replace these things, the function of the utility is just going to degrade. And in some cases, we don't have a choice. We absolutely have to fix these things, or the plants won't work or function properly. We won't be able to remove sewage from the sewage system and treat it, things of that nature. So it's more of we're putting up front that there's a certain amount of renewal and replacements that we're going to have to pay for anyway that we believe needs to come out of the regular rates as opposed to be borrowed for on a regular basis.
Worst case scenario, visualize Carnival Cruise Line. I mean, that's the reality. Other questions?
I hate to continue this, but there's one other question I have. Are we happy that Beverly Beach is coming to us to treat their waste, and we have to put out capital, and we'll recover that money over? What would the financial analysis of that project be?
Well, now they'll be paying
maybe to Richard or someone. Right. I don't know.
The Beverly Beach project does a number of things. The first and foremost, of course, is to eliminate the wastewater treatment plant that is owned and operated by Flagler County that is old, dilapidated, and failing. And they frequently have issues with discharge to the intracoastal, the same intracoastal that runs by Palm Coast. So there is an environmental benefit to replacement of that plant with connection to the city of Palm Coast. Our facility has got enough capacity easily because we're operating at about a little over 5 million a day. The current plant has 6.8 million gallons a day, and Flagler County will be only sending us 30,000 gallons a day initially. The other thing it does is then that puts the service availability on the beach side, on the barrier island, and so future developers can connect as opposed to building more package plants or more septic systems. So initially, we get the impact fee from Flagler County for their impact to our plant in the tune, I think the number's around $900,000. And then as additional developers can connect, and we extend the main up A1A to serve all ultimately all the way to Marineland, as those folks connect, that's how we recover our investment.
Richard, before you walk away,
Dave, if I may.
The importance of that, I believe, is that we are going to have to, at some point in time, build wastewater treatment plant number 2.
Correct.
And that is just the general growth of Palm Coast is going to get us there because we're running at 70-something% right now of our current one, and we only have one. That availability to gain beachside customers reduces the cost of that. Spreads out the cost of that project over whatever new customers we can acquire.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, ideally, you would have the exact capacity to match your demand. And any excess capacity sitting out there is costing you money. So ideally, you build only what you need, but unfortunately, you can't connect one home and build one home capacity and another home capacity. You have to do it in chunks. So it's beneficial to all the ratepayers to maximize the use of any existing capacity, but by the same token, you need enough excess capacity or the ability to build excess capacity so that when that growth comes, you can serve them. What you don't want to do is have the town centers down there ready for all kinds of growth. You get somebody down there wanting to build another building like the one that's down there, and you turn them away and say, no, I don't want your impact fees because I don't have the capacity to serve you. So you have to, it's a lot of forecasting, as you well know. We do a lot of planning and a lot of forecasting. When we think we're going to need that additional capacity, don't build any more than we have to, but have it ready for when the growth comes.
Because we're going to put in a lot, when we do build that wastewater treatment plant, we're going to put in a lot of infrastructure. That's going to be the heavy upfront cost, and the plan, I believe, is to open it with a 2 million gallon per day capacity, right? But that could be for the first customer that basically, gets us there, and having that available capacity for especially commercial growth, which could have a huge economic impact if we weren't available, if we didn't have it available.
And that plant will be built, the major infrastructure, what we call the Headworks building and some of those other major infrastructures will be sized for ultimate capacity of 6 million gallons a day. But the initial treatment modules will just be 2 million gallons a day. And part of the projects, as you saw, was the Matanzas Woods master pump station. And that is a master pump station will take all existing flow that currently goes to wastewater treatment plant number 1, turn it around so that on the day we flip the switch to turn that plant on, we're not just getting drops of water in there, we're getting a whole area. Basically, the B's and the L sections will all be turned around and sent to the new wastewater plant.
Thank you.
Other council questions? Chris, is that it, or do you have more?
If you'd like more, we can come up with some more, but I think that's it for right now.
Mr. Landon, do you have anything you would like to add?
No, I think very exhaustive presentation.
City Council, we have in your agenda package the 2 options that our consultants talked about, option A and option B. Before we get into a discussion of that, I'm going to propose that we take a 5-minute recess, and we will reconvene at, well, let's say at 11:25. At that point, we will entertain public comment. So let's take I guess it's a 7-minute recess. Some of us need to go. We're ready to resume. We're going to open a public comment. I've just asked the staff help me take notes if there are specific questions that are asked. So, that being said, anyone wishing to speak on this agenda item, please approach the podium, give us your name, limit your contribution to 3 minutes. Who'd like to start off? Just come on and get in line.
Good morning. My name is Greg Hansen. I'm a member of the a resident of Palm Coast. Mayor, just a terminology question, I think. I wasn't sure when the auditor said that we were debt-free and he congratulated us. And it appears to me that we have a bond or 2 bonds outstanding somewhere in the neighborhood of $200 million. So 2 comments don't seem to jive. If you could address that.
I'll get you an answer for that.
Thanks. And then on the enterprise fund for the utilities, and I'm just going on your presentation, which was very good, by the way. It appears that the enterprise fund has loaned money out rather than given money out. And if they have, I'd like to know, it looks like about $13 million. If they have, from your slides, then what kind of interest rate are we getting from that? And is it possible that that money will be repaid? If so, would we get both the interest and the principal back on that thing? And then a third comment, sir. In all the presentations, it talks about the capital fund impact fees helping to pay back the debt. Yet the recommendation from the last gentleman who spoke was that we do away with impact fees. Those 2 comments, those 2 parts of the presentations don't seem to jive. I'd like an answer to that.
We'll get you answers.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker. Pull the microphone down, please. Thank you.
I haven't done this for years. My name is Ivy Sterling. I'm a resident in Palm Coast for over 25 years. So I've been there, done that. I promised my husband to keep a low profile. So I will, so I will continue with my 3 minutes. Okay. But first, before I continue, I would like to address the councilman, because this issue is about the stormwater swale, that you have passed an ordinance that the loan people with their trucks and that trailer behind it, I have a empty lot next to me, and there was no problem with the swale there because my property and that was taken care of, because when I get my grass cut, I did that too. So there wasn't any water. Opposite me, it seems like the ordinance is pitting neighbors against neighbors because they're in the lawn business. They decided, okay, since I don't have water in my swale, they park the truck there. And apparently what happened, by parking there, it becomes a trench because the rain and the side to the street, the asphalt, it become really ugly environmentally, because then it accumulated water, and the water eventually will come to me. So what I am saying to you, that I think that ordinance should be revised, because the staff told me that they had certain time that they could have parked, but apparently no one's checked, and it becomes a parking, permanent parking. So I would appreciate if you look into that ordinance and see, because it's an impact of expense to the city. Because if you maintain the swale and it destroy, it means it goes back to the taxpayers have to shuffle that money out for that project. So that was my issue. The next issue I am talking about is the rate case, because I have to tell you that I participate in the forum with the environmental sensitive wetlands in the state. And as a matter of fact, I must say, I can't recall right now, because this was in the past, because I said 25 years, this was in like 1992, before you bought city. Because at that time, when you were ready to buy the city, it had a hearing where the PSC, we could have had the
15
city.
seconds, please. 15 seconds.
Okay. The PSC rate case in the past, I have testified to the Public Service Commission hearing, where I opposed the outrageous rate increase for the sewer and water service. Fortunately, the rate...
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but there are a lot of other people who are going to want to speak, so if you'd like to...
This wouldn't take long, because...
I'm sorry. 3 minutes. Thank you very much. Next speaker.
Oh, gosh. Please, I have to finish
I'm sorry.
this.
I'm sorry. I want to be fair to
everyone.
everyone. If there's time at the end, we'll see if we can bring you back up. But 3 minutes. Thank you very much.
Because it has to do with the sea.
Excuse me, please. Thank you very much.
It has to do with the infrastructure that has to be done. Oh,
Okay, good morning, gentlemen. My name is Phyllis Scheffler. I've been a resident here, permanent resident here, since 1978. I've been coming down here since 1971. I've seen the good and the bad. And I listened very intently to each of your presenters here. Unfortunately, since I didn't have the opportunity to respond or ask the question after each presenter, I'm going to kind of push them all together and perhaps I can get an answer. I want to try and get my 3 minutes in, so I'll speak very rapidly. Anyway, number one, it was presented in a bar graph that there were no increases in taxes for the past 2 years. Am I the only one? My property value has gone down. My taxes have gone up by several $100s. You can check my taxes if you want. I live at 17 Crossbow Court. Number two, are the property owners of the vacant land in the town center paying any portion of the wastewater fees that are going to be increased for we property owners who are living here? They are impacting the property as well as I am. And number three, I think I have 4 questions. The city loaned money for the extension of Old Kings Road, which has not been paid back, $5.2 million. Unfortunately, that money, if it was paid back, could possibly have gone to allaying some of the costs that are going to be considered now for the water and sewer. And also, I'd like to know from the financial advisor, how is his fee being paid? Is it a percentage or is it a flat fee for the money that he's involved? I don't know, are you going to give me the answers now, or do I have to go home and ponder?
We'll get you an answer when all public comment is
Okay,
finished.
you and I, Mayor, worked many, many years ago, if you recall, on the Taxpayers Association. I knew you then, and I know you now. And you have changed. I've gotten slimmer, and you've gotten heavier. And anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to know I'm going to celebrate my 87th birthday on Saturday. And I played tennis 5 mornings a week, but I don't play for free. It costs me and my husband $720 a year to play. So all the people who complain about getting a free ride, I'm not getting a free ride.
My name is Diane Lang, and I'm a resident of Palm Coast, and for 12 years, permanent resident. First of all, I'd like to thank those gentlemen that shared their expertise with us today. It was a long, long time. However, I gleaned what I could because I don't have the background that they have. I appreciated the questions the council asked. Because of your questions and the answers and the information that's been given today in regards to our water rates and how complicated it truly is, I would encourage the council to postpone making any decision on raising our rates until you have had another opportunity to really digest the information that's been given today. It seems to me that there's been a lot of information here that even the council was asking for confirmation on or clarification, as I would do. And I respect your positions, but I would also hope, and I do believe, that you respect the residents of Palm Coast. The second comment I have to make here today is that it was mentioned by one of the gentlemen about our wells here in Palm Coast. And it is true that many of our residents do not abide by the restrictions because they think they have a well they can water anytime and for a long period of time, which obviously is really draining our aquifer. However, those of us that do not have wells are aware of this, but if the rate goes up, does this mean that we have to really consider putting a well in then? I don't want to. I want to protect our aquifer. So I guess I'm asking for the council to think about how you would go about reinforcing the restrictions on the wells and their usage.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Good morning. My name is Ronald R. Radford. I'm a resident here in Palm Coast. To the council and mayor, I'm a little confused regarding the enterprise funds that the town has. I was told at one time that the funds from the enterprise could not and would not be used for anything else but that fund. This morning I've heard contradiction regarding its use and who can use it. I'd like to just give you an illustration. I had a cousin who had a large bulk milk farm upstate New York. And each year his taxes kept going up and up on his insurance for insuring his vehicles. Although his drivers were safe and he had very few accidents or claims, his insurance rate continued to increase. Eventually, he decided to insure himself, thereby saving a lot of money and not experiencing rate increases each year. Has the council considered possibly insuring some of the funds that they're looking for outside sources?
Good morning, Vincent Liguori, Palm Coast. I will speak fast too. Gentlemen, I'm usually very diplomatic, but this morning you proved to me that you are nowhere ready to make a decision by the nature of your questions. I do thank you for the education about gravel pits and mother-in-laws, though that was very instrumental. You are losing one facet of this argument. I've heard $11 million in savings from the city manager. 3 meetings ago, as I sat through this enormous thing, I heard 78 million. I heard 150 million. I know that the enterprise fund, the utility, makes 30 million. Where does this money go? What are you using it for? You haven't satisfied me about these questions, so how can you be satisfied? The most important point here is this: a complete disregard for your citizenry. 3 months ago, we stood here arguing the city manager wanted an electric utility tax, anywhere from $6, $10, $15 more a month. You voted that down prudently. Why? We were here. We fought it. We're here again. Why not now say, hey, no new debt. Don't crush this city. It doesn't need it. So what do? The only ones who are going to pay the bills are the residents. You said it too, Mayor. So why not implement a new facet of billing? Take all the monthly basic charges you have in the water bill now, which amount to $600 a year. Give us a break. Put it as a non-ad valorem into the property tax bill, or give us a tax break by creating a millage amount. Cut the debt. Get rid of the nonsense. In the end, it's we who pay. Thank you.
Louis McCarthy, Palm Coast. I wasn't going to say anything, but I think it warrants saying. I think that the council has a responsibility to publicize more on these facets of things. In other words, what repairs and stuff, instead of bringing it all at one time when our citizens really don't believe it, because that's what they're telling you. They're telling you, I don't believe what Richard is saying, even though a lot of the system is 40 years. So they don't believe that things can decay, or things where you have to think ahead. And you got to think ahead for us, because you know facts that they don't know. And the problem is that you're not sending out enough, or it's not being published, enough information that people can process and say, oh, that's why we have to have this, and that's why we have to have that. In other words, it's all done all at once, and people don't believe it. But if you have it and you publish on a monthly basis, or or on a weekly basis or something like that, and you show it on the website, hey, look, this thing is ready to go, that thing is ready to go. We have to have things in place to replace these things. And all I'm saying to you is, this thing is coming down, and you're going to have to make a decision that really, you have to make a decision, even though we may not be for it right now, but you have to make that decision and say to yourself, will we get more people or won't we? Will this break down and we can repair it, or have it outhouse, go out and everything, and of course it's more funds. So I'm saying the decision is yours. You know what the facts are. They don't. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good morning. I'm Alan Peterson. Most of you know me that I've had a long history in working to keep taxes as low as possible. I listened to your meeting on the internet 3 times that you had 2 weeks ago, and I think I perhaps was the only member of the public who went to your workshop, which presented all of this material and a little bit more last week. So I've had a week to think about today's meeting, and I'm convinced that we need the bond issue, because it doesn't make any sense to me that we've got new regulations, we're going to have to meet them. if you try to fight EPA, it's just going to cost a significant amount of money, and particularly in legal. The second reason is that we are spending 10% of our annual expenses on the utility for renewal and replacement of an increasingly aging plant. We're doing it now. It's not an increase from 5 to 10%. It's already being spent. And there's no question in my mind that now is the time to refinance all of the 03 bonds. The $500,000 a year in savings is significant. In a prior life, I was a banker, and I have personally purchased millions of dollars in tax-exempt bonds. And what you were told today by the advisors is correct and true, and hopefully everyone understands it. I believe that the advisors are somewhat overly cautious in the need for increasing operating reserves. But in my mind, it's more important to ensure that we get the $6 million that we're required to have sitting idle in the debt service reserve, so that that money can be used for the needed expansion and utility funds. Last week, you had 8 different options. And you presented the 2 that you favored the most. There was an option that I liked a little bit better, but again, I think it's critical to do something now. Delay isn't in the best interests of the residents, in my opinion. I hope that you will support option 2, and that's the delaying of future growth. And I do it for 2 reasons. One, if you delay your decision for 2 years, you'll have better facts, better figures. You'll see how fast the city will grow as we come out of a very deep and long-lasting recession. So one, it's going to eliminate some of the guesswork that's built into the first option. And 2, those who will benefit from the growth will pay for the growth, rather than have some of the existing residents pay for an expansion
15 seconds.
now that won't be needed perhaps for several years. And there will be residents who will be paying under option 1 who won't be here in a few years for whatever reason. So I would urge that you vote for option 2, which postpones the second plant for at least 2, 3, 4 years.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hello, council members. Dennis McDonald. Why do we need a utility rate increase? Simple. Our reserves and our enterprise fund have been misappropriated. Allow me to focus on one example. I sat with Mr. Quinn last week, and he confirmed that $8.1 million was used from the enterprise fund reserves to construct what we know as the Walmart no man's land. It breaks down like this: $1.3 million for design, $1.5 million for sewer and water lines, $5.3 for the road and the drainage. He confirmed that $2.8 million will not be paid back. Why? This is proof, in one case, of what has been Mr. Landon's mode of operation: build infrastructure for big developers off the ratepayers' backs. We need to have, next, we have $5.3 million of that amount for road, drains, and landscaping to be paid back. Mr. Landon schooled us in February, on the 5th, on his excellent job of getting 5% on our money. Mr. Landon, $260,000 interest paid once a year on $8.1 million is 3%. But, Mr. Landon, where's the principal? $8.1 million we had in our cash reserves. Mr. Quinn confirmed it's not in our account. It's being negotiated as of last Thursday by you as to when it will return. Mr. Quinn further confirmed that only $5.3 million will eventually return. Great deal. You gave away $2.8 million of stockholders' cash reserves for what? It's quite obvious to me that you did not go to the Donald Trump School of Negotiating, but you did go to the Bernie Madoff School of Accounting. Mr. Quinn agrees that the reserves are capital, and capital is a on-demand asset. The case for more capital made by this council cannot be granted. You have been a poor steward of our cash. The oversight of Mr. Landon's failures fall to this mayor and council. Mr. Netz is the common political thread all the way back to his beginnings in 2007. Common council members, vote yes, and you will own the errors of the past. A no vote is needed, and a promise for us to install a sewer and water authority elected by the people to control this so that we don't have to come back here and fight about this again. It's my opinion that what's transpired with the sewer and water is illegal. I know from speaking to others in Palm Coast that these voters share the same opinion. We are going to take this to the next level. Bottom line, Mr. Landon, Mr. Netz, you've made a mess out of our wonderful community, and it's time to clean it out. Recall is in play, gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker. Next speaker. Next speaker. Seeing no one approach the podium, we'll close the public portion. All right, is this on the water utility now? Is this on the water utility?
Yes, that's water.
Okay. Pull the microphone down, please. I'll give you an additional couple of minutes.
Okay, thank you for giving me a chance. Okay. What I am about to tell you, that when the PSC made the decision on the utility, they did not increase rates because they find that the PEP tank system and the CIA, which is the contribution in aided construction, that the gravity system and the pressure system costs were taken into consideration at the time. Presently now, if the CIA from the service connections is going to put in PEP tanks, there is not enough money left for building treatment plants and well fields and disposal facilities and maintenance of storm water, and that's bound to affect the rate base. What is going on here, in my opinion, is eventually the taxpayers are paying to the utility company to develop the property of others. Once again, in my opinion, the council should not and must not try to fix everything at once within the utility, or else, if you do, you are going to bankrupt your city. First, fix the hardware under the ground, the PEP and gravity system, step by step. I understand the demographics of the population in Palm Coast and throughout the county for fair representation and productivity growth. You need to have steady income flowing. The vast majority of the growth is the retiree seniors. Many of them have passed on, turning fertilizer. So where are you going to get this money from? If you do fix the gravity and the PEP, those PEP tanks, because those are the main hardware under the ground for serving your plant. And if that does not work, because it was shown previously from the PSC that the system was malfunctioning and the city could have gotten this system for nothing. You could have gotten for $25,000 or $25 grand, because the Committee for Responsive Government, we sent a letter of intent to the county, and the problem then, you, Mr. Netz, I think it was in the Taxpayer Association, you didn't approve that. You pay $86 million for malfunction lemon. So if you...
15 seconds.
Okay. So you cannot take a lemon and bringing it back to gold. You have to take a step by step to fix that lemon. And you cannot compare a house with a utility company because things do go bad.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are you still accepting new speakers?
Yes.
Thank you so much for giving us so much information today. We are informed voters, and in fact, we're very serious about that part of our responsibility. One of the things that was not addressed at all about the approaches, first of all, why don't we sell the water company to somebody who can run it, somebody who's been there for a long time and has the capital? We're looking at literally probably $30 or $40 million that could be capital back to us, and hire somebody who knows how to run a water company. Does anybody here know how to do that? That's my comment.
Thank you.
Good morning, gentlemen. Janet McDonald, Palm Coast. First of all, I want to thank everybody who's added their information from an amplification from the first meeting. I agree that with new information, the prudent thing to do would be to wait. And I would love to see this city and this commission create a new choreography for all of our hearings, that the first reading be a 9 o'clock morning meeting and the second meeting be an evening meeting. So many of our community are disenfranchised because of the choreography that has been in place pretty regularly lately, where we have an outpouring of interest and then an inavailability for participation for most of our community. And as all of that wonderful information was laid out for us, we had so many people who have obligations. They have day jobs. They had to leave. They didn't get to voice their opinion. So I would urgently request that you planfully involve the community by availability at the 7 o'clock evening meeting for the second hearing of any very, very important issue that comes before us. One of the people who left was a business person. And one of the things that touched my heart deeply is that most of the business community feels that they cannot have a voice in this council when they think that their money is not being spent well, because they've had repercussions, political service repercussions that impact their way of life by impacting their companies. I think that's atrocious. But I know that it happens. And I think we need to see what kind of community we are. Raising rates is one way to hurt people. Impacting their business is another. And I think we need to have a higher line of ethics on both fronts. The other thing that happened was a homeowner left, and she's in precisely the same position that Mr. Lewis mentioned about adding a room onto her home. And she's looked at every single penny that goes out to see where she could save money so she could do that comfortably. And the only thing, the connection came to her, the only thing that she can do is what you're doing to her. And she's thinking of passing the hat along your table to make that contribution so that she can do what she wants to do to add on to her house. That's the one advantage you have. You have us to pass the hat along to, and she doesn't. So in the respect for the homeowners, we can't do what you do. We don't have that pot we can go to time and time again. We do have to be responsible. And I respectfully ask you, and I would love to hear, rather than from just Mr. Netz, I would like to hear from each one of you. Who do you answer to at the end of the day? Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker. Next speaker. Seeing no one approach the podium, we'll close the public portion of the meeting, come back to council. Let's see how we can do with some of the questions. The first question had to do with a statement that we were debt-free. That is talking about the general fund, Mr. Quinn, the debt for local government operations. We are debt-free. The debt that we have is for the utility fund, which, as Mr. Quinn pointed out, separate books, separate bookkeeping. The question, how much was loaned out from the utility fund? And another speaker has heard or claims to have heard different numbers. So can you enlighten us on that?
Chris, I'm going to answer that one because that one's directed at me again. I always have to thank Mr. McDonald for giving me the opportunity to explain how the business is operated and how it actually we're trying to operate efficiently. Yes, the widening of Old Kings Road is the issue, and that's the only place that we have used utility dollars to loan for the construction of that. The project itself had three funding sources. One of them was the utility fund for relocating and upgrading the utility itself. And that, just like you heard, we're doing Pine Lakes Parkway right now. And instead of resurfacing the road, or in this case widening the road, and then coming back a couple of years later and doing the utility upgrade, we actually plan and say, okay, we're going to combine those projects. As you also heard Mr. Adams say, that particular line, or the lines in Old Kings Road between 100 and Palm Coast Parkway, are in bad enough need for replacing or upgrading that even if the road doesn't happen, we'll have to go and do a separate project. So those funds, which Mr. McDonald refers to as not paying back, were used for actual utility work that was appropriate for utility dollars. The second source of funding was impact fee dollars, transportation or street impact fee dollars. Once again, widening the street, those are very appropriate. It's about $2.4 million, I believe, is what was there. The last chunk, which is about $5.2 or $5.3 million, was the dollars that were responsibility of the property owners. And the property owners agreed to tax themselves to pay for the remaining portion, actually for the remaining portion about 5.3. So the city had two options at the time. One of them is we could have gone to a bank and borrowed the money and then had them pay us the interest and the principal. However, at the time, we had money sitting in the bank that we issued the bond issue for a couple of years earlier, and we were making less than 2% interest on that money. So it's sitting there making 2% interest less than, or about $80,000 a year for the 5.2 or 5.3 million. So instead of going to the bank, we actually used money that was sitting idle to loan to that project, and we charge 5%. So the interest on 5% is approximately, the figure Chris gave me was approximately $260,000 a year that the property owners in that area are actually paying us, paid us cash each year for the last 3 years. So as a result of that, we actually added $180,000 into the utility fund that we would not have had we done that. As far as payback, yes, it has to be paid back. And Mr. McDonald is correct. We have told the property owners that it is time to start actually having the tax assessment so that we can guarantee we will get paid back. Because the tax assessment, if they foreclose, if they go bankrupt, we still get those tax dollars. City Council has already taken the first step a few months ago to make sure that's happening, and we are working towards having that continue. Would we like that $5 million back right now? Yes, because now it's time to go to the next stage. However, we will continue to make 5% interest on those dollars. That is above and beyond which we could even come close to getting in the bank. So we are, as a result of this, once again, making almost $200,000 a year on that money, above and beyond what we would do otherwise. From a business standpoint, if you're a business person and you've got money that you have sitting idle for the future, would you leave it there at 1.5% interest, or would you try to invest it in 5% interest and make more money on it? That was a decision at the time. That simple.
Thank you. All right. The next speaker, or one of the next speakers, question why, if we need a rate increase, are we proposing an impact fee reduction? I don't know, Chris, if you want to handle that one, or do you want to let one of our consultants handle it?
I could at least start it off. While Jeff gets up here, the impact fees are actually based on a study of the required capital looking forward in our capital program. As the amount of capital projects decreases, the impact fee requirements decrease. If we had a much more aggressive capital program, the impact fee would, in all likelihood, have to increase. But I'll let Jeff talk more about the particulars.
That's correct. It's actually based on the actual capital improvement plan and the existing facilities that you have, and we divide that by the amount of customers that those facilities can serve. So last time the fee was performed in 2007, you had a capital improvement program of like $150 million. Now that's dropped down to $78 million, so a significant drop. So when we redeveloped the fee, that dropped correspondingly with that lower capital improvement program.
Thank you. Mayor, if I may add, by law, we can't just arbitrarily set those fees. It has to be based on the actual capital programs. So this isn't something that is just numbers pulled out of the air. It is actually based on financial accounting, and that's why they are set as part of this process.
Right. The fees have to be set based on an actual analysis of what your capital expectations are.
Mr. DiLorenzo, you want to comment?
Yeah, I was just going to add that when you set those fees, it's a snapshot in time. You have, in 2007 we had that $150 million capital improvement program, and to reduce volatility when it comes to construction, you set that fee over that planning period, and now we are in the new planning period, and again, it's a new snapshot in time. We have a $78 million capital improvement plan, so it's been reset.
Yes.
Okay. The next speaker, I think, was confusing utility fees with taxes. The speaker said you claimed that there were only 2 tax increases when, in fact, they've had a tax increase in a number of years. I think the difference is we're talking utility fees, not property taxes.
Mr. Mayor, we get a lot of those kinds of questions, and when we're talking about property taxes, we're talking about the city's portion of your property taxes. School taxes, county taxes may go up at the same time our taxes are remaining level. So if a person was to look at their total tax bill, it indeed may have gone up, but the city portion of those taxes should not have fluctuated very much over the last several years.
Okay. Next speaker asked, does Town Center pay wastewater fees? I think the context was stormwater fees, but does Town Center pay wastewater fees?
Well, first of all, the Town Center was a very large development. When the Town Center Community Development District and its developer built Town Center, they built all the water and sewer infrastructure and contributed to the utility at no cost. We also have a reuse infrastructure in there, and so all customers in Town Center, which obviously there aren't a lot of water and sewer customers, they pay the same rates as anybody else within the city limits because they're within the city limits. In addition, the Town Center Community Development District is the entity that maintains all that landscaping. They own and maintain all that landscaping. The only thing that the city's responsible for maintenance is our standard level of service. So basically, it's the asphalt roads. All that upgraded stuff is paid for by the CDD, and the CDD buys wastewater effluent reuse to irrigate town center. That's why they can irrigate many hours as opposed to within the restrictions, because the Water Management District allows reuse to be irrigated at any time, so they're irrigating all day long. They're buying that reuse from the city utility.
If I may piggyback on that, even when it's raining, is a good time for them to be watering their grass from our standpoint, because when it's raining is when we have the most wastewater hitting our plant. And at the other end, if we don't use enough reuse, then we have to start discharging it either at our RIP sites, which is sprinkling it on the ground, or ultimately in the intercoastal as a last resort. So when people say, wow, look at that, they're wasting the water, we view that as actually sometimes being a good thing if it is reused. The other thing I'd like to add, because of the I think connotation, people talk about wastewater and stormwater sometimes intermingled. And Mayor, you said, was this a wastewater or a stormwater issue? The CDD, the Community Development District for Town Center, is also responsible, in addition to all that landscaping, to take care of all those ponds. I think they've got over 20 ponds in there, and that whole drainage system is part of that district's responsibility. We still charge those property owners a stormwater fee, but a reduced level, because we don't go in and maintain the direct system. But I think it's a 70% reduction, because they still get the benefit of the canal system and the overall major system, as we've talked about before. So they do pay a stormwater fee, but not at the same level, because they take care of a lot themselves.
Mr. Quinn, how is the financial advisor paid? Percentage, flat fee?
It is based on, and I'm sorry, I can't remember exactly, but it is based on the amount of that borrowing. I think it's important to keep in mind in this particular case that we're trying to decrease the amount of the borrowing by recapturing the $6 million debt service reserve. But it is based on the range depending on the amount of the borrowing, and I would have to look that back up, honestly. I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay. One speaker was told at one point that enterprise funds are restricted, not restricted. I think you addressed that. Our policy has been to sequester enterprise funds within the enterprise. We don't use it as a profit center. Then there was a question about why don't we have self-insurance? Instead of going out and buying bond insurance, why don't we self-insure?
Well, when the city first acquired the utility in 2003, and Mark can help me here if I misstate this, we basically had no credit, so we had to buy bond insurance. In 2007, again, as Mark had mentioned, trying to get the best possible rates. City was still relatively new. The bond insurance helped us get a AAA rated rating and get the equivalent interest rates and benefits that went along with that. Currently, that's exactly what we are doing. We are self-insuring. Since the insurance companies really have been downgraded, our debt service reserve and what we're trying to do with keeping up our bond rating, at least at the A level, is a way of self-insurance so that we don't have to get the bond insurance.
Okay. Next speaker suggested that instead of raising utility fees, we should pay those costs out of ad valorem taxes. Raise taxes instead of raising utility fees, then at least those homeowners that itemize their deductions could get a discount. And I'll touch on that from a philosophical point of view. You can come back with an economic point of view. Everybody pays property taxes. Developed property, undeveloped property, large chunks, small chunks. To take a portion of property tax dollars and use them for a utility that only serves a portion of the property owners would be, in my mind, not a fair and equitable circumstance. That was the same kind of discussion that we had with stormwater. Should undeveloped property pay for stormwater? Shouldn't stormwater fees have a rational nexus to benefit received? Well, if you start using property tax dollars to pay for a service that only some people get, that's inherently unfair in my mind. Chris, do you have any economic comments on that one?
I do. You know, this has come up a few times, and I've done some research with, via the IRS on this, and only about 35% of the folks in Florida itemize their deductions. And of those folks that do itemize in Florida, most of them have annual incomes in excess or greatly in excess of $50,000 per year. The median income here in Palm Coast is below $50,000 a year. So those are certainly things that we've considered. We've thought about it, and those are just some of the facts that we've looked at.
Okay. Then there was a discussion, as I can summarize it, when a new home is built that is not served by a gravity sewer, we have to put in a PEP tank. Do the impact fees that we charge cover the cost of the PEP tanks, or are we losing money? Richard, I guess that's your baby.
No, the impact fees pay for all the cost of the infrastructure, whether it's sewer, or whether it's gravity sewer or PEP. And the lady was referring to a Public Service Commission decision. We haven't been regulated by the Public Service Commission since before 1999, so this is pretty much old history. Many rate studies and different adjustments in rates over the years from back in 1995 until today. So when you look at the overall cost, one of the things, as I recall, and you're going way back, is that the PSC required us to be fair, and that it shouldn't matter whether you're on a PEP system or a gravity system. You shouldn't have to pay different just because that's the system that was in place in the area that you live. So all the wastewater impact fees are based on the average cost to the ERU, the equivalent residential unit, and it's spread out evenly to all those that have connected.
Thank you. And the last question that I have, why not just sell the utility company? And I'd like to repeat a little background information. Once upon a time, ITT built a community called Palm Coast, and they built a utility system, and they ran the utility system. And at one point in time, ITT decided they'd had enough. They were going to divest themselves of Palm Coast. They sold the utility system, put it up for sale, put it on the block. At that time, there was no city of Palm Coast. There was no local government. Flagler County looked at the option of buying it and chose not to. It was not $25,000, as the speaker said. It was closer to $35 million. But for whatever reason, the county chose not to buy it. That's a decision that they made many years ago. Who did buy it? A company, a subsidiary of Elite, a company called Florida Water Services. They bought it. They ran it. After a number of years, Florida Water decided, or Elite decided, that they were going to get rid of, dissolve their Florida Water Service subsidiary. The utility system was put back on the market. At that time, we were a city. The initial prospective purchaser was a government entity known as FGUA, the Florida Government Utility Authority. It was an association, if you will, an authority formed by cities and counties who jointly would purchase, acquire, operate utility systems. It looked as though that was going to be the disposition of the utility system, until two small cities in the Florida Panhandle, the city of Milton and the city of Gulf Breeze, formed a cooperative, and they got into the bidding war for the simple reason that they could run it as a profit-making organization. Not a bad idea. I don't fault them. That was an option, and they had to make profit. At that time, in order to prevent Palm Coast residents being at the mercy of two cities hundreds of miles away that had no correlation or relationship with our residents, they weren't elected by us, they had no interest other than running this as a profit center, that's when the city of Palm Coast got involved. And we purchased it to protect the residents. To sell it now, assuming you find somebody with enough money, deep enough pockets to buy it, they're going to buy it. They're going to look for a return on their investment. And this goes back to what we talked about earlier. It has always been the goal of Palm Coast to have the utility system break even. We don't want it generating a profit because that means ratepayers are paying more than is necessary. We don't want it losing money either. We don't want it deteriorating. But we did not want to structure the rates so that there would be a profit that could then be used, siphoned off for some other purchase. Anyone who purchases the utility system is going to set the rates such that they're going to get a return on their investment. Return on investment is profit. That's why we don't sell it. And I think that answers all of the questions that I have. Staff, did you come up with any others that I may have missed?
What was the question or the request to alter the meeting schedule to accommodate people who couldn't make the current city council meeting schedule? I don't know if that was
That's something that City Council can certainly discuss. It's not something we're going to decide today.
Right.
Certainly look at that. Okay, which brings us to the resolution that we have before us. And this is a resolution regarding the adoption of utility rates. And you have essentially, in terms of options, you have option 1 and option 2. Option 1 was the 87722. Option 2 was the 84422. You also have the option of tabling this to some future date. You also have the option of not adopting any rate increase at all. So, open to council for...
Mr. Mayor, just as far as the option about tabling it, as we may have spoken about, the Florida statutes require a specific kind of notice, an additional kind of notice for this particular type of decision. And in the utility bills that went out, there was notice of today's meeting. So if you wanted to choose the option of continuing your decision, one way to do it would be to do it to a time specific. A specific date and time, then you would not have to re-advertise. On the other hand, in my legal opinion, if you were to just table it to a not a defined term, then when you did choose to bring this back, we would need to re-advertise this to be consistent with the Florida statutes in the utility bills.
Okay. So we have a series of options available to us. Is there a motion, or is there any council discussion?
I'd like to make a motion, Mr. Mayor, that we adopt option number 2 as our utility rate for the coming...
According to the schedule, it's printed.
Right.
Is there a second to the motion?
Just a word of clarification that just so I understand and everyone that's still here understand, the increase on option 2 would be 8% effective April 1st of this year. And even though we're calling it fiscal year 2014, that officially begins in October of 2013, which would be the 4% on top of the April 1st. Is that correct? So, okay.
That's correct.
Okay.
So we have a motion. Is there a second?
I second. I have some comments.
Please.
On postponing the meeting, to my count, this is or postponing the decision. This is our 6th time, I believe, we've met about this, several times with public comment. I believe that we need to make these improvements. We need the ability to make these improvements, and if we continue to wait, and that's just going to put further pressure on the ratepayers because we're going to have to collect those dollars. The second thing is I prefer option 2, and I think Mr. Peterson actually said it perfectly. It puts more onus. If we were to choose option 1, you have the current ratepayers taking more of the hit for expansion, and we don't know what that growth is going to be. It will become clearer in the next couple years, and yes, we're going to have to do this all over again, and that's going to be fun, but it makes more sense to have a clearer picture of our growth and to put those additional costs on those new ratepayers and not levy them all to the current ratepayers. So that's my 2 main reasons for supporting this.
Thank you.
Your Honor, I have some discussion also. I'm on the horns of a dilemma here. I have spent time with our staff, and let me say that the staff that is employed by the City of Palm Coast is as fine a group of people that I've had the privilege to work with in my 42 years in management. They're experts in what they do. Here's my dilemma. We have considered very strongly and in great depth how to raise money for things that we all agree need to be done, but how to do it, what's the best way to do it out of the pocket of the taxpayers. Let me quote some numbers here for you. When we closed our books at the last fiscal year, I look at these items, programs: transportation and physical environment, culture and recreation, building permits and inspections, golf course, tennis center. We expensed $19,766,000 towards those endeavors. If we were to find a way to recoup 20% of it, we wouldn't have to change the rates at all, and I don't think we've explored that. I've brought it up several times. I was told that it would be explored. If it has, I haven't seen any numbers. I haven't seen any type of a comparison. So, you know, I'm not sure that the 2 options before us is all there is. I think we haven't exhausted the considerable talents of our staff to look at ways to take out cost and take that savings and use it for what we're considering to pass on to our customers. And that's why I am not ready to vote on either one of these motions at this time, Your Honor.
Any other council comments?
Bill, I didn't catch all of the groups there that you listed, but I will tell you that the one you listed, building, is an enterprise fund. It's paid by the users of the building department, and there would be no way to use those dollars. They're actually restricted by Florida.
And I respect what you're saying, Jason, but here I only picked out some of $78 million in change in expenses. If we just took that and took out 5%, we wouldn't need to change our rates. And I just don't think that with all the talent that we have in the city, and let me tell you, it's formidable. I just don't think that we've turned over every rock and every stone, and I'm not happy with what's in front of me right now.
Mr. Ferguson?
Where do I start? I'm involved up here because of my interest to help Palm Coast get to the next level. What is that next level? It's already a first-class place. One of the reasons it's a first-class place is because we have a very well-run water utility. If we had a poorly run water utility, I probably wouldn't have moved here as I did, and it may have affected your decision to stay here or whatever. But as I sit here and think about all of the discussion that we've had, and it's been extensive, and I've come from a place in the world, in the business world, where decisions are made based on cold, hard facts. Investment dollars. Government's a little different story in that we're not trying to make a profit. However, we're inclined to and charged with making prudent decisions. The prudent decision at this time, I think, is to support the continued excellence of our water utility system, for two reasons. One, we want to get to the next level, and that is to take the burden off of all of you, and including us up here, from the ad valorem taxes, where we're paying, as the mayor outlined, a disproportionate share of the cost of having good fire protection, which obviously we need. Secondly, we need good police protection. We need good water and sewer utilities. You can't live without it. I filled my gas tank today. It cost me 45 cents more than 3 weeks ago. Now, it cost all of you probably $4 or $5 to get here today, many of you, or to go home. So when I look at what we're proposing, or what has been proposed, which I'm in favor of option 2 as well, because it represents a mitigation of the impact, but more importantly, the cost of $5 or $4.61 per month is $50 a year. And for $50 a year, I want to be able to turn on my water, make sure it tastes acceptable. I don't buy bottled water. I don't go to Publix and buy the 89 cents a gallon. I drink it. I have a filtering system. I do not have a filtering system in my house. And when I flush the toilet, I want it to flush. And I don't want to have any repercussions. For $60 more per year, I'm happy to do that. So to get to the next level of bringing business here, which will help defer the costs, hopefully, of all of our taxpayers, I'm in favor of option 2.
Are there any other comments? Mr. McGuire, I'd like to address your concern. You're talking about general fund expenditures. That is determined each year by City Council in collaboration with staff and the city manager. A budget is proposed. We have the option of approving, disapproving, or modifying that budget. I would be very much opposed to taking tax dollars and using them to support the utility. I have no problem with reducing the burden, the overall burden on our residents, if we can find ways to reduce the general fund, the ad valorem tax. The end result is you may pay a little more in water fees and you may pay a little less in ad valorem taxes. That I believe is your goal. But the appropriate time to deal with the budget is during budget preparation and budget approval, which is coming up in the not too terribly distant future. And we can certainly look at those expenditures, and each one of us can determine for ourselves if there are areas that we think it should be cut. But I think at this point it would be irresponsible not to have this rate increase. So, unless there's other council questions, we have a motion and a second to approve option number 2. Because of the significance of this issue, may we have a roll call vote, please?
Vice Mayor McGuire.
No.
Councilmember DiLorenzo.
Yes.
Councilmember Ferguson.
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis.
Yes.
Mayor Netz.
Yes.
Mayor, this motion passes 4-1.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for your attendance, your participation, your comments. Give you a minute to leave if you want to before we move on to agenda item number 5.
Did what you had to do.
This is Bill. This is nothing new. This ain't my first time in this rodeo.
I know.
And I've been told I would get some kind of an analysis, and never did.
Okay, agenda item number 5, an ordinance providing for the contraction of the Grand Haven Community Development District boundaries. Mr. Reichman.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, this is an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Palm Coast, Florida, providing for the amendment of Ordinance 2003-11 that adopted and incorporated Flagler County Ordinance number 9703, which established the boundaries of the Grand Haven Community Development District within the City of Palm Coast. Pursuant to an interlocal agreement recorded in OR Book 952 at page 1527, sequitur between the county and the city, providing for the city to administer matters under the city's jurisdiction that pertain to the Grand Haven Community Development District, providing for the contraction of the Grand Haven Community Development District boundaries by removing parcel ID numbers 711-3140s, 0103-040s, which is the deleted property, as described in Exhibit A to this ordinance, providing for conflict, severability, non-codification, and an effective date.
Thank you. Mr. Landon.
Mayor, City Council, this is a second reading of what is really just a housekeeping item. This is The Community Development District is actually a taxing district. It has a board of directors. That board has requested that this area be removed from its boundaries, as it's really not part of it today. It has actually become part of the new Grand Living development that you approved. When you approved it at that time, this was a request of the CDD, and you indicated support from that. So this is a formal action to make that happen. It is a small, less than 1 acre parcel on Colbert Lane, and everything is in order and ready for your final action today.
Thank you. Council questions? Seeing none, open the meeting to the public. Anyone from the public wish to be heard on agenda item number 5? No? Anyone? Seeing no one approach the podium, we'll close the public portion of the meeting, come back to council. Additional questions, comments, or a motion?
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Roll call vote, please.
Vice Mayor McGuire?
Yes.
Councilmember DiLorenzo?
Yes.
Councilmember Ferguson?
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis?
Yes.
Mayor Netz?
Yes.
Mayor, this motion passes 5-0.
Thank you very much. This brings us to the consent agenda, items number 6 through 10. Does anyone wish to remove any of the items from the consent agenda?
No, sir.
If not, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries without objection. This brings us to the public participation portion of the meeting. Anyone from the public wish to be heard on any item not on today's agenda? Please give us your name, limit your contribution to 3 minutes.
Name is Linda Hansen. Last week, or last meeting here, we talked about the trees on Palm Coast Parkway. I want to inform these people, it's a shame everybody's gone, that the Planning and Land Development Resolution Board meets tomorrow, Wednesday, the 20th at 5:30 p.m. And they are meeting to facilitate, to grant a variance that will facilitate the widening of Palm Coast Parkway from Florida Park Drive all the way across the freeway to Cypress, which will take the outside lanes along the parkway from Florida Park, as I just stated, remove all the trees and widen it to 6 lanes, just like Belterre. 387 beautiful trees are scheduled to come down. 387 trees. We're going to look like Belterre. And they will be replaced with twigs, and you're doing all this without any input from the public. Is this how we do business in Palm Coast? After today, I'd say it certainly appears so. Mr. Netz, I asked you about this during the last public meeting of the council, asked you all to think about at least leaving or delaying the project at least 5 years, or possibly designated a scenic drive. One council member told me he didn't know what I was talking about, and Mayor Netz, you gave me a little song and dance about not being able to interfere in anybody's property rights. As the lobbyist for the builders here in the county, I know that Mr. DiLorenzo is well aware of what was going on, but he was strangely quiet. This has nothing to do with property rights, and you know it. This plan was put into effect in 2010, and there have been no changes to that site on the city's website during all of this time. Now I find out that DOT is about to release this money, and the Planning and Land Development Regulation Board will discuss finalizing this tomorrow. No action in 3 years. Really? At the last meeting, you knew nothing, and now you are finalizing it. Has the public been updated since the preliminary design and engineering public hearing back in 2010? The city's website has not been updated since that meeting. What about all those people who signed up to be notified? Why haven't they been notified, Mr. Netz, and if so, when and how? Certainly the taxpayers haven't. Would you like to tell us all about what's going on out here? Tell them about how you're about to tear down all those lovely old growth trees along Palm Coast Parkway, one of the last scenic drives in Palm Coast. Why do we need to be doing this now? Is it so that we can do some major building along that parkway, maybe tear down Palm Harbor Shopping Center? Has the city ever been paid back for the drainage they paid for the ABC liquor store? And finally, I want to say something. If you're looking for money to save, we have a city manager who makes $168,000 a year, and that doesn't include his benefits. Our governor makes $130,000. They took a pay cut recently, and he doesn't accept his salary. Our city manager is paid more than all but 5 governors in this country. I think that's atrocious, and I'm sorry, I don't think he's worth it.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Louis McCarthy, Palm Coast. I just want to say that Belterre South, moving on with the beautification in the center aisle, is looking better and better and better. That is from all the way down to, oh boy, I can't.
Royal Palms.
Royal Palms, you got it, and it's looking better and better. And I see the way the guys work, and I'm telling you, my hats are off to them. Youth. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Since we're on landscaping, I appreciate the comments that this gentleman made. Certainly the people that are trying to make beautification in the middle of concrete are doing a great job. But one thing we can never replace is what God has put on this beautiful planet, and yet it seems that we want to chip away and chip away and chip away. We do have the responsibility to maintain a sense of what Florida used to look like. There is a big push about Florida forever, Florida Foundation, Florida, 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 and yet it's looking more like Jersey, 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 with some plants, which is a nice upgrade. But as the people in Ormond have done their loop, and as they have done special construction to preserve these beautiful canopy ways, we can do something in concert with development. Development is very important, but conscious and responsible and mindful development is also very important. And Palm Coast Parkway East is a lovely, lovely remembrance of what was here. And while there will be buildings on those sites, I'm sure, in the time to come, we do owe it to ourselves and to the future generations to preserve that lovely drive. And please do whatever you can to and enlist the help of the citizens, because they will be able to provide the impetus to do whatever work needs to be done in a nonprofit, just like A1A and all of those other foundations. People love this area, and they want to see it maintained. I urge you to do what you can or to enlist the public to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Vincent Taylor, Palm Coast, Seminole Woods. Just one short question, sir, gentlemen. The residents of Seminole Woods are still wondering whether we're under any early consideration concerning our sidewalks. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Greg Hansen, Palm Coast. I'd like to share a discussion I had with Mayor John Netz a couple days ago about why he came to Palm Coast. And he told me the story about traveling to another city in Florida and visiting friends, and what an ugly place it was. Didn't have any trees, wasn't any landscaping. He said, my God, this is Florida. I'll never move here. And then he came down here with a friend, and his friend brought him to Palm Coast. And Palm Coast had trees and had lovely streets and had great landscaping. And John told me, he said, you know, this is a place I could live. And he did. He moved here. And now we're getting ready to destroy it all. John, you're going to take it back to that city in South Florida that you went to and couldn't stand it because there were no trees. Please help us. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Ray Stava, Palm Coast. This is just a question because I just don't have the answer or the information. It has to do with the walking and bike trail that was put along Palm Harbor Parkway and the bridge over the main canal by the yacht club. The substandard concrete that was put in by Klein for the footings for that bridge, did the DOT reverse its position where they were going to refuse to pay for the $2 million for that path? Or how much has Klein been fined and penalized for that? And why do we have 250 contracts with a guy that's a buffoon?
We'll get you an answer to your question. Next speaker. Next speaker. Seeing no one approach the podium, we'll close public portion meeting. Come back. Nestor, the question was raised, has the developer, the owner, the builder of ABC Liquors reimbursed the city for the cost of burrowing under Palm Coast Parkway for stormwater drainage?
Mayor, as I recall, that was at the developer's expense.
Nestor, I can help out. Not as just recall, but I've confirmed recently because of some rumors that some people in the back of the room are spreading, is that the city did not pay for that. The ABC Liquor paid for the stormwater system, as all private developers pay for the stormwater system. They did tap into our system that was in the public right-of-way, as almost all systems have to, because that's where the water then goes, but they paid for all that cost and not the city whatsoever.
Thank you. Update on the Seminole Woods path, bike trail.
It is
multi-purpose path.
Yeah, it's in the budget this year to go a portion of the way from State Road 100 south. It's under design. We do have some wetlands issues and some of those typical permitting issues that we're dealing with, but still on schedule to start construction this summer and completing the first segment this summer.
Okay. The last question, I think there's a little confusion about location. The issue with Klein Construction, the concrete DOT bridge, it wasn't the Palm Harbor Bridge, as I recall, it was...
Palm Harbor was not a Klein Construction project. The project, we had issues about the concrete used was the Belterre pathway. Actually, it was a couple of bridges. And yes, that has been resolved. It required FDOT's approval. They took the necessary steps of boring, and Klein actually ended up having their contract reduced as a result of part of that. I can't remember the exact amount. He asked the amount. It seems to me like it was about $50,000, $60,000. So there was some penalties that went along with
But
that.
they have done a test boring, and the concrete is adequate for the...
Yeah, because it's just a pedestrian bridge, we really never questioned the fact that it was adequate, but it was more of FDOT has their standards, and FDOT was funding it, and they weren't going to fund something that wasn't met their specifications. So then that's what happened, is FDOT basically said, we're not going to fund that, and Klein had to accept that, and we moved on.
Okay, thank you. Discussion by City Council of matters not on the agenda. Mr. McGuire, we'll start with you.
No, thank you.
Mr. Lewis. Yes. Mr. DiLorenzo.
No, thanks.
Mr. Ferguson. Discussion by City Attorney of matters not on the agenda.
You keep asking me to say more, but most people don't make that request. So no further comment, Mr. Mayor.
Discussion by City Manager of matters not on the agenda.
Yeah, Mayor, City Council, I would like to take this opportunity because of some of the comments about Palm Coast Parkway, of giving you an update as to where we are with that project. That has been a priority of City Council's probably ever since we almost became a city, because it is a bottleneck for Palm Coast Parkway, the I-95 bridge and the approaches to it. It's basically a 6-lane thoroughfare except over the bridge. The funding for this is coming from the FDOT and maybe some federal dollars. We have been working on this once again literally for 10 years, which is quite common. We've had numerous public meetings. There are some trees that, as it would be with any construction project. I just confirmed that only a few larger trees, but it's not going to denude Palm Coast Parkway of trees whatsoever. Any trees that do come down, I guarantee you, I got people on staff that protect trees in Palm Coast. It's just almost part of, in their sleep, and any other time they can protect the trees, and they're very much involved in this. The issue right now is we need some small right-of-ways. We're going to have to purchase a small portion of right-of-way from some of the businesses along Palm Coast Parkway. One of them, and I think it's Dunkin' Donuts, has requested that their setback line not be affected. So they're asking, because when you buy the right-of-way, that moves the property line closer to the building, which means their building would now be non-conforming, which would be okay, but they have asked, their attorney has asked that we provide them with a formal variance to say their building is still in compliance. So it is a formality that the property owner has asked for that's not really required. And that is the item that's going before the planning board here very shortly, or this week, I've been told. So tomorrow evening, in fact, right? Okay. Then the contract, once we get all the right-of-way, and then those right-of-way purchases will be coming to City Council here shortly, then we will go out to bid, and there's a deadline, a real hard deadline of June 1st that we have to be far enough along to move this project into construction. So that is what we are doing at this time. I can assure you we're minimizing the impact on the trees. There is, I think, what I'm hearing, not necessarily from the speakers today, but out in the community, there is a fear about the property that recently sold on the south side of Palm Coast Parkway eastbound that has a real old growth stand of trees all the way to Colbert Lane. That is a whole separate issue. That is going to be private property. What we're talking about is adding the outer lane, the 6th lane on Palm Coast Parkway, something that we've been working on a long time. The other thing I would add is that our event people continue to try to bring more events here into town, and tonight we have the first food truck event. I've been told it's a hot item out there that people like to go to, but we have a variety of food trucks coming into town starting at 5 o'clock tonight. We've partnered with the school district, and they're going to have some of their students that will be making the proceeds with this will go to their cause, whatever it's a sporting cause or whatever their cause is. So it's a good event. Hopefully people will come out and support it tonight at Central Park starting at 5 o'clock. Mayor, that's all I have.
Is that it? Mr. Vice Mayor?
Move to adjourn.
We are adjourned.
We are adjourned.